Ukraine has been. Putin's Kursk gamble just backfired big time. For months, Ukraine has been locked in a brutal fight over Kursk, a region where it managed to capture 450 square miles in August 2024. Russia has since clawed back 40% of that territory in a counteroffensive, bolstered by 50,000 troops, including up to 12,000 North Koreans sent by Kim Jong-un. Putin wanted these foreign reinforcements to tip the scales, but instead, they're becoming part of the problem. Ukraine isn't playing defense anymore. President Volodymyr Zelensky has unleashed a bold new counteroffensive, turning the tables on Putin's forces. With surprise attacks across multiple fronts, Ukrainian troops aren't just holding the line, they're pushing to take back what's been lost. So what does this mean for Kursk, for Putin, and for the North Koreans sent into the grinder? We'll break it all down, starting with the news. On January 6th, CNN reported that Ukraine had spent the previous day launching a volley of counteroffensive assaults against Russian positions in Kursk. The news was confirmed by Andriy Kovalenko, the head of Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation, who told the outlet that Ukraine was launching surprise attacks throughout the border oblast. Much as it did with the initial Kursk invasion in August 2024, Ukraine was hoping that this surprise element would catch the Russians so off guard that they would be forced to cede territory. The strategy might be working. Posting to Telegram on January 5th, the head of the Ukrainian presidential office, Andriy Yermak, delivered a simple message. Kursk region, good news. Russia is getting what it deserves. Yermak provided no further details, though his message suggests that Ukraine had enjoyed at least some victories in its latest counteroffensive and that it would now start to push its advantage. Russia's defense ministry had the opposite message. While Yermak lauded the brave Ukrainian soldiers taking part in the counteroffensive and their supposed success, Russia claimed it had repelled the Ukrainian attackers. A defense ministry statement claimed Russia had taken decisive action, supported by artillery and aviation units. That action supposedly resulted in the destruction of the main Ukrainian forces that are gathered in the village of Berdyan, just 9 miles from the Ukrainian border, to prepare for the counteroffensive. Russia had prevented the Ukrainian armed forces from breaking through, claimed the ministry, suggesting that Yermak's Telegram post was false. Who's telling the truth? It's difficult to say at this point. CNN noted that it couldn't verify any of the battlefield reports relating to Ukraine's new counteroffensive at the time. However, we may get better insight from some of the Russian blogs posting about the attacks. CNN said that several of those blogs acknowledged the fighting that took place on January 5th and claimed that Ukraine's forces were pushing north to enter Berdyan. One blog claimed that Ukraine had thrown reserves into the new Kursk counteroffensive. It also noted that Ukraine had taken a clever approach to its counterattack. For the breakthrough, the AFU, or Armed Forces of Ukraine, covered the area with powerful radio-electronic warfare systems, hampering the work of Russia's unmanned aerial vehicles, claimed the blog. While pointing out that Russia's tanks and artillery are actively working against the enemy, the blog also said that most of the battles taking place involved small arms. Another Russian blog said that the fighting had started from the direction of Sudza, and that Ukraine had landed paratroopers into the region to support its fighters. In this offensive, the enemy uses mine clearance trawls, tanks, and other armored vehicles, claimed the blogger. So the one thing we can say for certain is that the counteroffensive is underway. And the use of the word breakthrough by the first Russian blogger suggests that Ukraine has enjoyed a lot more success than Russia's defense ministry would like to have the world believe. More information about the counteroffensive comes from other sources. The Guardian's report on Ukraine's attacks included footage of armored columns making their way across snow-covered fields en route toward a village named Bolsho-Soldatsko, situated just northeast of Sudza. This village appears to be a secondary target for Ukraine, suggesting that it has launched its counteroffensive on multiple fronts. That suggestion was essentially confirmed by Ukraine's general staff, which claims that 42 combat.
I can't get hard, not even with the blue pills. Will the salt trick work for me? All right, pay attention. If you're over 35 and not as firm as you should be, or if you're popping the champagne a little too early, I highly recommend the salt trick. In just 20 seconds,
clashes took place on January 5th, with 12 of those clashes continuing into the next day. The Guardian also says that there are unconfirmed reports that Ukraine's soldiers have entered Berdyan, along with making their way into another small town named Novosotnitsky. The Guardian also confirmed that Ukraine had used electronic countermeasures to take out Russian drones and that it had active sappers in the Kursk region removing Russian mines. These are not the sorts of reports we'd expect to hear if the Russian Defense Ministry's claims that it repelled the Ukrainian counteroffensive were accurate. And Ukraine is twisting the knife. In the Kursk region, the Russians are deeply concerned, claimed Andriy Kovalenko on January 5th. They were attacked on multiple fronts, which came as a surprise to them. This is far from the single attack near Berdin that Russia has attempted to minimize the counteroffensive into. Ukraine is attacking in dozens of locations, with fighting ongoing in many of them and possible successful reclamation of territory in others. It also appears that Ukraine may be using British-made weapons in its counteroffensive. In its report on the Ukrainian counteroffensive, The Telegraph said that reports coming in from military bloggers suggested that the fighting was both fierce and, at times, somewhat confused. Amidst the armored columns Ukraine was sending into its assaults were British Challenger 2 tanks, claimed the bloggers. The Telegraph couldn't confirm those reports, but if they're accurate, Russia has a major piece of equipment to deal with. The Challenger 2 is a stalwart of the British Army, having seen use in engagements as varied as Kosovo, Iraq, and Bosnia. The first batch was built in 1986, with the 4-person crude tank being among the more modern that have taken to the field in the Ukraine war. It comes with a main L-30A1 120mm rifled gun that can carry 47 rounds, along with a 7.62mm L94A1 chain gun that can rattle off fire at a terrifying rate. It's also a surprisingly speedy behemoth, with the tank being capable of traveling at up to 36.6 miles per hour, despite weighing 62.5 tons, more when it's loaded with its crew. If Ukraine is deploying these assets in Kursk, that tells us that it's serious about retaking at least some of the territory that it lost to Russia's own counteroffensive. The obvious question is simple: why is Ukraine engaging in this counteroffensive now? A small part of the answer relates to the conditions in Kursk at the time Ukraine launched its counteroffensive. Freezing winter weather in the oblast has made it difficult for Russia's ground forces to advance, while providing conditions that make it easier for Ukraine's armored units to move forward, according to The Guardian. Beyond the Challenger 2s, The Telegraph suggests there are also reports that Ukraine is using Bradley fighting vehicles in its advance, with those vehicles being used to ship the country's troops to positions quickly. Contrast that to Russia, which has been sending its infantry and North Korean troops to attack Ukraine's positions on foot, and you see a clear agility advantage for Ukraine. It's launching a counteroffensive now because it knows that a huge portion of Russia's troops are mired down in snow and ice, making them less able to respond. Speaking of Russia's North Korean troops and the Ukrainian advantage, there's another factor that plays into Ukraine's decision to counterattack now: Russia's casualty rates in Kursk. Our mention of Russia sending its soldiers to assault Ukraine on foot hints at the tactic Putin has relied upon so far during his Kursk counteroffensive, and it's the same tactic he's using inside Ukraine, sending wave after wave of cannon fodder at Ukrainian fortifications in the hope of exhausting the enemy's resources. These assaults have borne the fruit that everybody expects. Ukraine claims that in the 5 months between its initial Kursk invasion and the current counteroffensive, it's inflicted 38,000 casualties on Russia's forces. About 15,000 Russian troops have been killed in battle, with another 23,000 being injured. As if playing a childish game of tit-for-tat, Russia once again put out numbers to top the ones Ukraine released, claiming to have caused 49,010 troop casualties in Kursk during the same period. No details are provided about dead versus wounded, and it seems like an unusually high number, given how often Russia tries to minimize the numbers when it comes to how many Ukrainians are actually in Kursk. Russia is also losing a lot of the soldiers it's received from North Korean President Kim Jong-un as part of its collective defense treaty with its Asian ally. We mentioned earlier that Kim sent up to 12,000 of his soldiers, many reputed to be part of North Korea's elite Storm Corps, to Russia in October 2024. Zelensky reaffirmed that number during a January 2025 appearance on Lex Friedman's podcast, while adding that Ukraine has killed or wounded 3,800 North Korean soldiers. That's about a third of the entire contingent Kim has sent over, telling us that Ukraine has experienced plenty of success against Putin's biggest ally. In fact, the 2 days leading up to January 4th saw Ukraine destroy an entire battalion, comprised primarily of North Korean troops, according to Zelensky, suggesting that Kim's troops are experiencing casualties thick and fast. Why does this matter in the context of Ukraine's Kursk counteroffensive? Well, it all comes down to numbers. Ukraine has been chopping away at the 50,000-strong force Putin sent into Kursk to reclaim the territory. That brave defense has resulted in a weakened Russia. With fewer troops with which to launch attacks, Russian pressure may be waning, which has opened the door for Ukraine to launch counterattacks. There are now gaps in the Russian front line, or at least in areas where there are more scattered troops compared to those with rigid defenses. Ukraine has likely identified where Russia is weakest based on its casualty rate and used that information to hit Putin where it hurts. Where Russia's leader would have hoped that this human wave approach would break down Ukraine's defenses, he instead weakened his own to give his enemy more opportunities. Ukraine has taken those opportunities, and it now appears to be advancing into several of the small villages and towns that it lost to Russia's initial Kursk push. But there's more. Ukraine is also mindful of a massive event that's set to occur midway through January, the ascension of President-elect Donald Trump to the White House. Trump was another subject of Zelensky's conversation with Friedman. Ukraine's leader highlighted that Trump's security guarantees could lead to the end of the war in Ukraine, but only if Trump followed through on his promises. Zelensky also hinted at the fact that Trump appears to have enough leverage over Putin to at least force a ceasefire to the Russian leader's special military operation. For his part, Trump has claimed that he'll end the war within days of coming into office, with his much vaunted but ill-defined peace plan likely being the biggest card America's incoming president has to play. Zelensky knows this. He told Friedman that Trump and I will come to an agreement and offer strong security guarantees together with Europe, and then we can talk to the Russians. Whether Ukraine's leader actually believes this is up for debate. After all, he told French President Emmanuel Macron on December 30th that Ukraine needs to be realistic about its territorial issues and that there will be no quick and easy resolution to the war. Territorial issues is the key phrase relating to Ukraine's most recent counteroffensive. Theories abound about what Trump's plan will actually look like, but one of the most popular involves creating a massive demilitarized zone across the 745-mile front line of the Ukraine war. That zone will be patrolled by European troops. Polish, German, British, and French soldiers have all been suggested, with the US taking a hands-off approach. Both Ukraine and Russia would have to agree to the conditions of a ceasefire, with the zone preventing either from attacking the other. From there, peace plans could begin, with negotiations likely to revolve around the territory each country has. Russia currently holds about a fifth of Ukraine, with the majority of that territory being in the south and east. Putin's push in Donetsk, more on that later, could lead to Russia holding even more by the time that Trump comes to power. As for Ukraine, it has Kursk as leverage that it can use to reclaim some of the territory Russia has overrun during Putin's special military operation. So another reason for Ukraine's Kursk counteroffensive becomes clear. For as many soldiers as Putin has lost in his effort to retake Kursk, he's at least seeing some success. We mentioned earlier that Russia has already retaken about 40% of what it had lost to Ukraine's August 2024 invasion. Ukraine's counteroffensive is an attempt to retake at least a portion of that lost territory, so that it has as much leverage as possible if and when Trump brings it to the table with Russia. And Kursk holds a lot of value for Putin. Though smaller in the context of how much territory Russia has snatched from Ukraine, Kursk still represents the first time that Russia has been invaded successfully.
You are using apple cider vinegar the wrong way. If your goal is to lose belly fat, you need to use it the right way. Guys, I discovered a way to turn apple cider vinegar into something even more powerful than those Manjaro pens. Seriously, when you take it the right way, it shrinks your belly, reduces
successfully since World War II. Leaving it in Ukrainian hands, even if that means trading Kursk for much more territory inside Ukraine, will be a black eye for Putin. He may be willing to trade more of Ukraine than he gets in return for Kursk to soothe his humiliation. Zelensky will be banking on that, which is one of the reasons we're now seeing Ukraine push to reclaim territory in Kursk. He's creating pressure for Putin. And that brings us to another reason why Ukraine has chosen now to counterattack in Kursk. Fellow of the American think tank Yorktown Institute Robert Clark affirms that Ukraine intends to use any territory it has in Kursk as a bargaining chip later on. However, he also notes that Putin has committed a lot of his reputation amongst his own people to the success or failure of Russia's current efforts in Kursk. Clark says Ukraine's latest move will mean a huge deal more to Putin than it will to Trump in the context of peace talks. Putin has told the Russian people over the Christmas period that he will return all of Kursk to Russia. So the ability for Putin to really retain control of Kursk is going to be far more important to him and to Russia than it will be to President Trump going forward. Again, it's the humiliation aspect we mentioned earlier. Putin is under pressure from his people and perhaps forces in the Kremlin that have taken Kursk as a sign of weakness, thanks to what Ukraine is doing. Reclamation of the Russian land lost becomes a whole lot harder when Ukraine is actively taking territory back, along with defending what it still holds. Times Radio's international correspondent Alex Cadier agrees. He says that Ukraine's counteroffensive bucks the narrative of the last few months, in which Russia has been slowly retaking territory in Kursk. And again, that creates pressure for Putin. It shows him that even with the massive manpower advantage that comes courtesy of having North Korean troops, Ukraine's forces still have the capacity to punch back. And these heavy punches will stack even more pressure onto Putin, Cadier claims. It's certainly significant in the amount of resources that have been put into it, Cadier says when referring to Ukraine's counteroffensive. But also, it will have very serious diplomatic consequences if and when these ceasefire talks happen. So it all seems to have worked out well for Ukraine. Wintry conditions gave it the mobility advantage it needed to launch the counteroffensive in the first place. Having enjoyed so much success in terms of pure Russian and North Korean casualty rates only added to the opportunity that winter delivered, as it created gaps for Ukraine to exploit. And with Donald Trump soon to become president, Ukraine is taking every chance it gets to grab territory and pile pressure onto an already weakened Putin, both domestically and in terms of upcoming peace talks. There's also the matter of Donetsk to consider. While all of this fighting in Kursk is going on, Russia is pushing hard to claim as much territory in Ukraine's east as possible. Russia is advancing through that region at the fastest rate it's managed in terms of territorial acquisitions since February 2022 and the initial invasion. Putin's troops are on the verge of flanking the Donetsk city of Pokrovsk and have forced the abandonment of key Ukrainian defensive positions. These include an underground stronghold in a ruined thermal power plant that Ukraine has spent most of the war defending. These advances won't have escaped Zelensky's notice. In fact, some commentators have even criticized Ukraine's actions in Kursk, with that criticism likely to intensify in the wake of the counteroffensive. Critics suggest that Ukraine will be better served committing the troops it has stationed in Kursk to the Donetsk defense, thus slowing the Russian advance. The Ukraine military's commander-in-chief Alexander Syrsky says otherwise, claiming that the entire Kursk operation has forced Russia to divert troops it would have sent to Donetsk. By launching its counteroffensive in Kursk, Ukraine hopes to keep these troops committed and perhaps push Moscow into diverting more, so it can stem the flow of losses in Donetsk while it retakes chunks of Kursk. The question now is simple: will Ukraine's Kursk counteroffensive succeed? It's a little too early to tell, as the operation is still ongoing. However, Ukraine does have a history of failed counteroffensives during Putin's special military operation. In the summer of 2023, Ukraine attempted a counteroffensive in southern and eastern Ukraine to take back land snatched up during the initial invasion. That counteroffensive stalled out, meaning Ukraine failed in its attempt to sever the connection between Russia-controlled Crimea and the Ukrainian mainland. Could this counteroffensive in Kursk suffer the same fate? It's possible, though the conditions are far different. In the summer of 2023, Ukraine spent several months building up the forces and weaponry it needed to launch its counteroffensive. That gave Russia plenty of time to prepare, allowing Putin's forces to create layered defenses across the front line. Trenches and mines were laid in strategic areas, all of which slowed the Ukrainian attack to a crawl, allowing Russia to mostly defend its captured territory. That's not what's happening during Ukraine's Kursk counteroffensive. Ukraine launched surprise assaults this time around. It's still targeting multiple points along the front line, just as it did in summer 2023, but it's doing so without giving the Russian forces a chance to prepare. Ukraine is also attacking while Russia is in mid-attack itself, again eliminating the defensive mindset that allowed Putin's forces to successfully repel the summer 2023 counteroffensive. There's also the possibility that the current Kursk counteroffensive might be diversionary. The BBC reports that a handful of Russian military bloggers have speculated as much, with Yuri Podloyarka suggesting Ukraine's current attacks may be diverting Russia away from a larger attack to come. Alexander Kots, another Russian blogger, seems to agree, claiming that a main attack may be launched elsewhere while Russia is preoccupied with Ukraine's smaller attacks. Perhaps Ukraine has something bigger lined up for Russia. If that's the case, it casts Russia's claims of having quelled at least portions of the Ukrainian counteroffensive into a new light. Perhaps Russia was meant to have deflected those smaller attacks. Ukraine may be poking the bear, inflicting casualties along the way as it prepares for a heavier push against a weakening Russia in Kursk. That all remains to be seen. For now, we want your opinions on the Ukrainian Kursk counteroffensive. Is this Ukraine's last gasp attempt to hold on to land before Trump becomes president? Is a larger Ukrainian attack coming? Is Putin trapped? The war in Ukraine has now lasted for over 1,000 days. That's 1,000 days of both Russia and Ukraine continuing to accumulate losses, both countries trying to use every available tool at their disposal to turn the tide of the war. For Ukraine, this meant receiving more than $230 billion in aid, either financial or military, from NATO and its allies across the globe, and the Ukrainian military has used this aid to great effect, even managing to counter-invade Russia, the implications of which we'll discuss shortly. For Russia, though, the war has been nothing short of a disaster from day one. It started with a failed operation to sever the Ukrainian government at its core in Kyiv. That led to the lackluster mobilization and logistics strategies that ultimately caused the initial invasion of Kyiv to be repelled by the Ukrainian forces. Then the Russian Navy was forced to abandon its posts alongside the Ukrainian coast, a remarkable achievement for Ukraine considering that they have no real navy to speak of, which leads us to the first half of 2024, which saw negligible gains for the Russian military on the current main front line in Donbass. But what exactly led to this sudden decline? And is this an indicator that the war might be coming to an end, with Putin finally admitting defeat? The truth of Russia's current situation is nuanced and depends on multiple factors, so let's delve a bit deeper into what exactly led to Russia's military failure in Ukraine and the possible ramifications of the war extending into 2025. It wouldn't be wrong to say the first half of 2024 was considered the preparation phase for both countries. The Russian military enacted some of its plans in late spring and early summer in the aptly named Summer Campaign of 2024. The campaign involved mounting a renewed invasion effort on the Kharkiv region, which was previously freed from Russian occupation back in November 2022. By now it should be obvious how the summer invasion turned out for the Russians. It was a colossal failure. The Russian military used odd tactics in the region, to say the least. Instead of leveraging the army's large consignment of military vehicles, specifically tanks, the Russians predominantly focused on infantry-based strategies. Reports from the Kharkiv region at the time suggested that the Russian army used regular soldiers who would ride motorcycles to get to the newly made front lines as quickly as possible before discarding their bikes to join their fellow soldiers in the trenches. To support this initiative, Russia deployed makeshift turtle tanks, actually T-62s, T-72s, and T-80s, modified with additional metal armor on top. Those modifications highlighted Russia's growing desperation on the Kharkiv front, as even its older tanks required makeshift upgrades to remain viable in combat. The turtle tanks had practically no offensive capabilities, which indicated that Russia was starting to run out of usable tanks and modern armor to use on the Kharkiv front. Why is that? Well, the answer perhaps lies in how Russian tanks proved to be much more vulnerable than they were supposed to be. On paper, T-90s should be modern tanks with combat capabilities close to the American M1 Abrams, the British Challenger 2, or the German Leopard 2. All of these tanks have similar main armaments, electronic warfare defenses, and optics for low vision and nighttime operations. In fact, the T-90 was lauded to have some of the most potent armor casing of modern tanks. However, the T-90, like its older cousins, the T-70s and 80s, was equipped with an autoloader for the main armament, unlike its Western counterparts. This feature allowed the tank to operate with one fewer crew member, but came with a critical design flaw. The spare ammunition was stored both below the main turret in the autoloader and dispersed throughout the hull, a layout that was necessary due to the smaller size of Russian tanks. This configuration created a devastating vulnerability. If explosive ordnance penetrates the tank and ignites the stored ammunition, whether in the autoloader or elsewhere in the hull, it can trigger a chain reaction of detonating shells. This jack-in-the-box effect results in the catastrophic destruction of the tank, often launching the turret sky high. In traditional vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infantry combat, this wasn't particularly noteworthy, as the casing was a relatively small target that could only be hit slightly above or below the vehicle, which were unusual trajectories for ground combat. However, the Ukrainian army used weapons and tactics that capitalized on that weakness by using small, commercial-grade drones and outfitting them with grenades or anti-tank mines. The Ukrainian drone operators could directly guide the drone above the tank, specifically targeting either the hatch or the ammo storage. The result, the absolute annihilation of Russian tanks, in which practically no measures were enough to protect against the incoming drones. The proliferation of drone-based warfare stretched far beyond using them against tanks. The drones were outfitted with either surveillance capabilities or explosive ordnance, making them vital to practically any scenario and used on both sides of the conflict. The main benefit of using drones, at least for Ukraine, is that it allows its army to shore up its two major weaknesses. The first was lack of personnel. Ukraine has roughly a third of Russia's population, and its armed forces at the start of the war were outnumbered by as much as 5-to-1. This ratio got better over time as Ukraine tightened its conscription efforts and volunteers flocked to defend the country. But even today, Ukraine is estimated to have around 70% of Russia's total active manpower and only 60% of reserve forces. Secondly, drone warfare was a great economic equalizer. The FPV drones Ukraine used for small-scale missions cost as little as $400 to $500, making them highly affordable. Meanwhile, surveillance drones like the DJI Mavic cost between $1,500 and $3,000, according to Reuters. Even more robust models such as DJI's agricultural drones only cost a few $1,000s, keeping drone warfare relatively inexpensive compared to traditional military equipment. More robust drones such as the agricultural models from DJI come at a higher price point. For example, the DJI Agras T10 costs nearly $10,000, while other models in the Agras line range into the tens of thousands of dollars. Despite their higher cost, these drones offer significant capabilities, making them valuable assets on the battlefield. When combined with the ordnance and necessary modifications to make the drone flightworthy in a more militarized setup, such as extending its total range, Ukraine could field a single-use anti-tank drone for as little as $15,000. Compare this to the cost of the average tank, which ranges from $2 to $4 million.
EVE Online is a vast universe, alive with the unrelenting activity and combined history of its players. Pursuing lives of adventure, warfare, and prosperity, they share this existence in the biggest single shard, free-to-play MMO of all time. Set 21,000 years in the future, EVE takes place in a distant cluster of over 7,000 star systems known as New Eden.
And you can see why investing in drones can be lucrative. Even if 1 in 10 drones hits a target, which is often the most cited statistic from the Ukrainian military squads that focus on drone warfare, it could be well worth the investment. Drone warfare has also redefined Ukraine's coastal defenses. The initial wave of the Russian invasion included the Black Sea Fleet that blocked Ukraine's coast and prevented ships from venturing into deeper waters. This resulted in Ukraine's marine trade having to be rerouted either by hugging the coastal waters, moving alongside Ukraine, Romania, and Bulgaria, or by transporting the goods over ground to Romania and using its port to send ships through the Bosporus. Regardless of the option, the increased length and logistics caused grain prices to rise globally, as Ukraine is the 7th largest exporter of wheat in the world. The Ukrainians managed an early victory in April 2022 when they located the Black Sea Fleet's flagship, Moskva, and fired at it with coastal anti-ship missiles. But the real kicker came with drones, this time modified for sea-to-sea warfare. Ukraine has taken drone warfare to a new level, using coastal drones like the Sea Baby and Magura V5 to target Russian ships. These surface-based drones carried out nighttime raids that forced the Black Sea Fleet to retreat miles away from Ukrainian shores. Most of the fleet has since been relocated to Novorossiysk, leaving Sevastopol largely inoperable due to repeated long-range missile strikes. This has severely limited Russia's naval power in the region. The scale of Ukraine's drone warfare only grew in 2024, leading to significant Russian equipment losses that Moscow struggled to replenish. Reports from Russian state-owned agencies like TASS and IRA Novosti claim that Russia deployed its experimental T-14 Armata tanks, a modern upgrade to the T-90, on the battlefield. However, other sources, including the National Interest, dispute these claims, stating that the T-14s were never deployed due to their high cost and inefficiency compared to the T-90. Even if deployed, the T-14s would likely have faced the same challenges as other Russian equipment. Long-range Ukrainian drone tactics and frequent attacks made deploying expensive assets too risky. Ukraine's ability to produce and launch drones daily has created a consistent and cost-effective threat that Russia has struggled to counter. Russia's losses came to a head in August 2024 when Ukraine did what was previously unthinkable. They occupied Russian territory. The Ukrainian army crossed the border into the Kursk region, catching Russia by complete surprise. The Kursk invasion started small, with reports of between 300 and 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers supported by armored vehicles, tanks, and long-range strikes. But the extent of the invasion would soon grow to allow Ukraine to occupy roughly 500 square miles of territory inside Kursk in 3 weeks, which was more than Russia gained over the previous 7 months. The Kursk invasion highlighted a few problems that Russia seemed to struggle with, which would only accelerate its possible downfall. First, the Kremlin's response to the Kursk invasion was counterintuitive, paradoxical, and delayed. Initial reports from Russia suggested that it would mount a counteroffensive in as little as a few days, and yet the counteroffensive didn't come. Russian soldiers rapidly retreated from the region, with the military building defensive trenches to slow the Ukrainian advance. Those same trenches would be used by Ukraine itself when they managed to take over the territory, as they would stall the Russian counteroffensive in turn. The official reports from the Kremlin severely downplayed the actual state of the invasion, suggesting that the damage was significantly lower than first reported. This was obviously an attempt to keep the Russian population sternly under the influence of existing propaganda, which perpetuated the notion that Ukrainians were being used by the West to remove Russian culture. The propaganda went so far as to call the invaders terrorists, which was possibly a way for Putin to justify more persistent conscription efforts throughout the country. Secondly, the Ukrainian soldiers met relatively little resistance in Kursk. Unlike the contract soldiers who were fighting on the front, the bulk of the stationed troops in the Russian regions surrounding Ukraine seemed to be conscripted men on mandatory military service terms. Ukraine managed to capture around 600 men in the 3 weeks of the invasion, and an early report suggested that conscripts comprised 80% of the prisoners of war that were processed. The interviews with the prisoners revealed that some conscripts received as little as a few weeks of training before being shipped to their posts. The significant disparity between the use of conscripts and contract soldiers indicated that Russia was already trying to cut down its costs as much as possible. The Russian budget for 2024 was expected to expend as much as 40% of the government's spending on military and national defense. In other words, the country would use roughly 7% of its GDP on the military, a figure nearly double that of the US and triple most Western countries. The contracts for the soldiers were made much more lucrative, with salaries triple or quadruple the national average, ostensibly to attract as much manpower as it could for the front lines as possible. And yet, while the number of Russian contract soldiers soared through 2023 and 24, the actual number of troops hasn't. According to Riddle, an independent Russian media outlet that compiled the number of newly signed contracts throughout 2023, the figures reported by Russian authorities are significantly more inflated than reality suggests. Of the 490,000 contracts in 2023, Riddle estimates that only 150,000 to 200,000 of those indicate actual new troops that Russia could use. The disparity was chalked up to the significantly shorter contracts that the military started offering in 2022, usually to prisoners or soldiers exiting mandatory military service. With a contract that lasted only 3 to 6 months, a single soldier could renew their contract multiple times, each one being counted separately in the official statistics. The other, much bigger reason as to why Russia's military didn't grow as much as expected is more concerning. The country is losing troops at an alarming rate. The UK military intelligence suggested that Russia suffered as many as 700,000 military casualties by the end of October 2024. These include both deaths and injuries that would preclude future military service. Out of those, around 70,000 deaths were confirmed by the end of September 2024, according to independent Russian outlets Mediazona and Meduza, as well as BBC Russia. However, the report by the BBC suggests that the actual death count is expected to be significantly higher due to a lack of transparency in reporting deaths in the military.
Why do so many folks over 40 with type 2 start walking like this? If you take metformin and notice a sudden loss of strength in your muscles, especially your legs, then pay close attention. Hey, it's Joe Barton, top blood sugar author and expert. And before you start thinking about lifting weights or trying out exercises to help rebuild muscle and strength, well, don't just do that quite yet. Now, I'm not saying exercising is bad, but what I am saying is that working out on metformin can actually cause even more muscle loss. So you see, most blood sugar meds simply activate an enzyme that blocks sugar from being absorbed instead of helping or teaching your body to process it properly. And without enough sugar, well, the body won't have the fuel that it needs for muscle growth and repairs. Now, many people experience major muscle loss or weakness and lethargy and even feel their bones becoming more fragile. And that's why those on metformin typically have such joint discomfort. Again, it's because metformin blocks the body from absorbing sugar for recovery fuel. And the truth is, blocking sugar, which our body needs from being absorbed and used, is not the answer. And this is also why metformin is considered an archaic way to manage type 2, since it comes with a hefty price tag to your body's muscle and health. And with less muscle, the body's fat-burning metabolism slows down to a halt, leading to even more unstable blood sugar levels. And this is one of the reasons why so many folks with type 2 pack on the pounds and pounds of stubborn belly fat while seeing their muscle tone fade away. Now, I want to show you an all-natural way to fight high blood sugar while keeping your body in tip-top shape for years to come. In fact,
Even worse for Putin is the fact that the Russian losses keep accelerating. September 2024 was considered the deadliest month of the war to that point, the 5th consecutive month where the daily casualty rate never dropped below 1,000 troops. But October shattered that record, with casualties spiking to nearly 1,400 per day throughout the month. Ukrainian intelligence suggested that in total, Russia lost over 40,000 soldiers in October alone. and November 2024 seemed to have followed suit, with casualty rates hovering between 1,500 and 1,700 per day. In September 2024, the estimated total casualty count hovered around 640,000, but if the monthly trend continues, Russia could be expected to mark the 1 millionth casualty relatively early in 2025. Simply put, Russia can't sign on more soldiers in time to replenish its ranks. The contract soldiers get less and less time to train before they're deployed to the front lines. This, coupled with Russia having fewer and fewer tanks and vehicles to protect them, is likely the main reason behind the increased casualty rate. The more soldiers die, the more are needed to replace them. The meat grinder in Donbass never stops churning through Russian lives. The invasion of Kursk has led to Putin adopting severe and quite desperate measures to maintain the image of the Russian military being able to outperform Ukraine. The first of these measures came with the frequent nuclear red lines that Russia drew around the war. The country's nuclear defense policy has continued to change in terms of what Russia feels justifies the use of its nuclear weapons to defend its territory. Before the war, the policy was typically directed to other nuclear powers such as the US or China to warn against entering a direct conflict with Russia. After the war started, Putin started calling on the country's nuclear reserves whenever NATO would start suggesting more advanced weapons deliveries to Ukraine. Similar threats delayed deliveries of advanced long-range weaponry, specifically missiles that could be used to target vital Russian infrastructure close to Moscow. When the Kursk invasion happened, one of those red lines was crossed, namely Ukraine being able to enter Russia's territory and start its own occupation attempt. And yet there was no nuclear response from Putin at the time. The Kursk disaster led to NATO adopting a more aggressive stance toward Russia, with NATO military chiefs advocating for Ukraine to be given the opportunity to use long-range missiles to target Russian military compounds and infrastructure. This was one of the few caveats that the US put on the weapons they donated to Ukraine, and it remained there until November. In late November, the administration of outgoing President Joe Biden approved the use of ATACMS long-range missiles, which were transferred to Ukraine in April 2024, inside Russian territory. The exact wording of the approval seems to imply that the weapons will be used in Kursk, at least for now, with Ukraine using the missiles to cut the supply lines for Russian forces in the ongoing counteroffensive, which we'll discuss shortly. This goes directly against Putin's warnings that they would use nuclear missiles if Ukraine started using conventional ones in Russia. But with the many warnings about nuclear weapons Putin spewed in the past 1,000 days, and with no actual response, NATO might be willing to take their chances with this. The decision to allow ATACMS came due to Ukraine already possessing significant long-range options in its kamikaze drone industry. Ukraine launched devastating drone attacks deep into Russian territory starting in September, with one of the largest attacks occurring on September 10th, and using more than 140 drones that managed to hit the Russian capital of Moscow. The other way Russia has tried to regain some prestige is by trying to take back Kursk. This time, conscripts wouldn't be quite enough, so Putin called on one of his few allies, North Korea. In mid-October, reports from South Korean intelligence started popping up, referring to the North Korean military transferring thousands of its soldiers into Russia. The first report suggested around 3,000 people were moving to the Russian Outer Manchuria region. These reports were corroborated a few days later by Ukrainian intelligence, suggesting as many as 10,000 soldiers were being transferred directly to the Kursk and Belgorod regions, the two regions where Ukraine has mounted land-based offensives. The presence of North Koreans in Russia was one of the major escalations in the war, as it constituted a direct involvement of a third-party military beyond aid and volunteer service. Ukrainian outlets suggested that North Korea might be sending as many as 12,000 troops in the first wave to Russia. Russia has used the Kursk region as proof that its territory has been threatened and points to a defense pact signed with North Korea in June of last year as justification for allowing North Korean troops inside its borders. The implication of these North Korean troops being in Kursk is quite obvious. Putin will use them to bolster troop numbers. The wording of this defense pact, which is as ambiguous as Russia's nuclear deterrence policy, implies that North Korean troops could probably only be deployed inside Russian territory. However, there's no telling whether Putin plans to stick with that restriction for long. The North Korean troops have already started clashing against Ukrainian soldiers in Kursk as part of the Russian counteroffensive, which started in September. Reports from a Russian major general suggested that by mid-October, Russia had taken back roughly 50% of the territory. However, newer reports from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense indicate that Russia actually only managed to take 40% of the occupied territory. Most of the North Korean forces, however, are still in training, and Ukrainian intelligence suggests that they might not even be of much use to Russia. This is due to the troops having significant significantly less training in the types of warfare widespread throughout the Ukraine-Russia front lines, as well as speaking an entirely different language. The last time North Korea was in active conflict was in 1953, when the Korean War stalled and the Korean Demilitarized Zone was created. Furthermore, North Korea received a bulk of its military equipment from the former Soviet Union, which likely puts its military industry decades out of date in some respects. Additionally, reports from North Korean defectors who are in the military suggest that soldiers typically lack training and proper nutrition, making them ineffective in actual warfare. The Russian counteroffensive in Kursk is meant to do two things. First, by retaking Kursk, Putin hopes to regain the image that Russia is actually winning the war, as Ukraine holding a part of Russia's territory would give it an edge in eventual peace negotiations. Second, by using North Korean soldiers rather than native forces, the Russian military can focus its efforts on the main front in Donbass, which is seeing more and more action by the day. The significant casualties that Russia is accruing will keep it from maintaining the upper hand in the conflict, at least for now. This is evidenced by Russia resorting to using long-range missiles and drone attacks, including using an intermediate-range ballistic missile with a range of around 3,400 miles to strike deeper into the Ukrainian military and even civilian compounds. This, plus Russia having much more artillery to spare, partially thanks to North Korea sending over 8 million rounds of artillery shells by the end of 2024, allows them to make up for its manpower losses. However, the continued presence of North Koreans on the front should alienate one of Russia's greatest allies, China. China's support for Russia in the conflict has been relegated to underhand tactics like allowing Russia to dodge economic sanctions and deepening Russia's dependence on China for money. But even that was enough to put China in the spotlight as a stern Russian ally. If the presence of North Korean troops in Russia continues, or even worse, leads to more troops coming to Russia, then NATO might be encouraged to show more support for Ukraine in turn. The escalation of the war might also push China to take an official stance on the conflict, one that could see it losing significant influence in the Indo-Pacific and Africa. These territories are the ones with whom China hopes to build favorable trade relations, so cutting them out could be a severe loss of potential for the resource-starved Chinese industry. And with former President Donald Trump now inaugurated as the 47th President of the United States, the focus has shifted to how his administration will approach the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The Biden administration in its final days made a push to approve as much aid to Ukraine as possible, anticipating the uncertainty surrounding Trump's policy on Russia and Ukraine. This puts Putin on the clock. His Kursk counteroffensive has yet to yield a decisive victory, and with parts of Russian territory still under Ukrainian control, it remains difficult for him to convincingly claim dominance in the war. Given these dynamics, Putin may view Trump's presidency as a potential opportunity to end the war on terms favorable to Russia. However, what Trump's actual approach to the conflict will be remains unclear. But what do you think? How will Trump re-entering the White House affect the Ukrainian plans? The war in Ukraine is heading into its fourth year, and both sides are pulling out all the stops. Every inch of territory has become a battleground as Ukraine and Russia push for tactical, strategic, and technological dominance. But let's take a step back. When Russia's so-called special military operation began, Ukraine's military was dwarfed by Russia's in size and power. Russia was widely believed to have the second strongest military in the world, and most analysts thought Ukraine wouldn't last more than a few weeks. Yet, here we are. Not only has Ukraine held its ground, but it's managed to repel Russia's advances and even mount counteroffensives that have shocked the world. How did this happen? How did Ukraine, the underdog, manage to go toe-to-toe with a global superpower? In this video, we'll take you through the early days of the war, the critical tactics and strategies that helped Ukraine survive, and the advancements that have turned the tide. But first, let's look at just how vast the military disparity was when the war began. A CNN report dated February 25, 2022, has some of the closest approximations of Russia and Ukraine's military strength at the time. Russia's active manpower was estimated to contain around 900,000 soldiers, compared to Ukraine's 196,000, giving it roughly 4.5 times the manpower to use in the oncoming conflict. Perhaps the greatest manpower disparity lay in the air forces, where Russia outnumbered Ukraine roughly 5-1, at 165,000 to 35,000 total personnel. Notably, Russia didn't, and couldn't, amass all of its forces to enter Ukraine at the start of the invasion. Instead, the report suggested that there were between 160 and 200,000 soldiers out of the country's 300,000-strong land force used for the invasion. On the other side of the conflict, Ukraine fielded around 120,000 infantry. Essentially, while Ukraine was severely on the back foot at the start of the war, Russia didn't actually go all out, as had frequently been suggested it would do so. Part of this was due to logistics and history. Simply put, a part of Russia's military is comprised of mandatory conscripts, i.e. troops that are drafted at regular intervals to serve for shorter periods than contracted troops. By precedent, conscripts can't be deployed outside of Russian territory, something that came as a consequence of the previous Soviet-Afghan War in the 1980s, where Soviet casualties rose to around 670,000 over 10 years. After the war ended, the Russian population urged the government to prevent future deployment abroad, which seemed to have taken root. Even Putin seems to heed this precedent despite the country's woeful record in the ongoing conflict. But perhaps the biggest part of why Russia didn't bring its entire infantry to Ukraine is more in line with previous tactics and plans. The war in Ukraine could be said to be an escalation and perhaps even a natural progression of a conflict that started over 10 years ago with the Russian annexation of Crimea. And in that event, Russia managed to overtake one of Ukraine's regions with almost no shots fired. Instead, the Russian military performed what was essentially a martial coup, flying elite troops to Sevastopol's airport, surprising the local military and national defenses. Then the Russian military seized control of the local government, replaced the leadership with Russian loyalists, and started a sham referendum that prodded Crimea to join the Russian Federation. In 2014, Russia used the political crisis and civil unrest as the backdrop for the incursion, which helped nullify Ukraine's potential responses and speed up the process. When Russia announced the start of the special military operation in February 2022, Putin tried to repeat the tactic. This time, he'd go for the head of the entire country's government in Kyiv. In Putin's mind, Russia already had a claim on Ukraine both politically and culturally, and the Ukrainian people should have been overjoyed to rejoin the Federation. He believed that the core of the country wouldn't really pose much more than token resistance. Even though many administrations and independent bodies published proposed plans that Russia was gearing up for an invasion, Putin believed that a forewarning would only make Ukraine move a bulk of its forces to the contested Donbass region rather than reinforce Kyiv. He was only partially correct. On the first day of the war, Russia launched a two-pronged attack on Kyiv, with a small contingent of Russian special military forces aboard some 34 helicopters being the first strike team to approach the Ukrainian capital by air. The mission for these 200 to 300 soldiers was to take over the Hostomel airport, the largest airport that served Kyiv, and one with significant capacity to accept military transport. The attack would come from Belarus, or more precisely from Mysia, which was only an hour or so away from Kyiv by air. At roughly the same time, Russia mounted its land offensive from both Belarus and Russia, trying to push its mechanized units to reach the airport as quickly as possible. The plan turned into a disaster from the get-go. The aerial invasion was practically a non-starter, as the Russian forces took significant losses before they even managed to land near the airport and start fighting to occupy it. The Ukrainian troops barricaded the runway, prevented any aircraft from using it for the initial invasion. The airport's meager anti-air defenses managed to down at least 4 aircraft before the Ukrainians were overwhelmed and were forced to either surrender or fall back. Despite that, the Ukrainians managed to delay the Russian occupation of the airport for a few hours, which was enough time for them to ferry some of their own mechanized forces from the surrounding area. The Russian forces that were supposed to arrive by land were heavily delayed. Putin planned for that contingency by supposedly sending between 1 to 5.
If you think Tesla changed the world and made an army of stock market millionaires, just wait until you see what Elon Musk could be planning next. Thanks to Elon's new connections inside Washington, things are moving quickly, and it's even got a name, Project Colossus. I work full-time in financial research, come from the hedge fund world, and I'm even a CFA, and I can confidently say this has got to be the biggest stock market story you haven't heard, and it's nearly unstoppable. And it's about to see vast amounts of money change hands. Now, obviously, it won't remain a secret for long. Nothing Elon touches ever does. I recently went on stage to speak about this very idea. So
1,000 soldiers by aircraft transport. However, the Ukrainian military shelled the runway again, making it completely unusable and forcing the proposed reinforcements to fall back. With an occupied airport that they couldn't use and land troops that encountered far more resistance than expected, the Russian troops couldn't adapt to the new situation. Which brings us to the equipment disparity between Russia and Ukraine and how the latter managed to bypass it. Perhaps the most notable advantage Russia had over Ukraine at the start of the war was its impressive arsenal of vehicles. Russia had around 15,900 armored fighting vehicles compared to Ukraine's 3,300, approximately 10 times the number of military aircraft and roughly 17 times more helicopters. But none of these assets would end up mattering in the long run. While Russia had a significantly larger arsenal of tanks, they were heavily underutilized at the start of the invasion. Russian troops advanced too quickly for their own good at the start of the war, with the military trying to take over Ukraine on practically 3 fronts at once. The tanks were the fastest moving among the military vehicles, as tank squads typically didn't have support vehicles and infantry slowing it down. That would end up being their downfall. Without key anti-air support nearby, Russian tanks could be targeted by Ukrainian artillery and drones, which would turn out to have devastating consequences. The Russian main battle tanks, the T-80 and T-90, trace their lineage back to Soviet designs from the end of World War II. Russian war doctrine emphasized producing tanks that were smaller, lighter, and more maneuverable than their Western counterparts. This design made them harder to hit on the battlefield, but came with compromises in power and survivability when compared to NATO's heavily armored vehicles. To achieve their smaller profile, Russian tanks implemented an autoloader system that eliminated the need for a third crew member. However, this design also created critical vulnerabilities. The autoloader stored ammunition in a ring around the turret, which had areas with minimal armor. Compounding this issue, the tank's smaller size meant additional ammunition was often stored messily throughout the hull and turret, outside heavily armored compartments. This lack of compartmentalization made Russian tanks particularly susceptible to catastrophic explosions. Penetrating ordnance or anti-tank mines, whether striking from above or below, could ignite spare ammo, triggering a chain reaction known as the jack-in-the-box effect. This flaw has persisted across Soviet and Russian tank designs, including the T-90Ms. The T-90M attempts to address this issue with modernized safety features, such as storing most of its spare ammunition in the back of the turret with blowout panels, similar to Western tanks. However, whether these changes effectively counter the design flaws remains a topic of debate. While stymied by the fact that the initial aerial invasion of Kyiv ran contrary to the plan, Russia still maintained a heavy numbers advantage near the Ukrainian capital. However, the Russian military has been making a series of logistical and tactical errors ever since the start of the invasion. First, there was the failed aerial invasion of Hostomel. There was practically no reason to believe that such a bold strategy would actually yield positive results. Putin had already used the same move to occupy Crimea, so repeating it on a larger scale against the same country less than a decade later seemed to be completely out of character for a supposedly calculating ruler who also served in the KGB. In the same vein, the Ukrainian military was once part of the Soviet Union itself. The decapitating strike that was performed in Crimea and attempted in Kyiv was part of the wider Soviet military playbook, as it was already exercised twice before, in Prague and Kabul. Ukrainian officers were taught how to think like the Soviets, so they ostensibly knew about the tactic in one way or another. Furthermore, the Ukrainian military started to receive vital training from NATO forces after 2014, making them much more prepared to fight against an enemy that could exercise some modicum of aerial superiority, such as Russia. Secondly, after the initial invasion attempt was rebuffed, Russia seemed unprepared for the scale of the war it got itself into, despite being the aggressor. The military convoys practically traveled through unoccupied territory to get to the front line, giving the Ukrainian military more than enough opportunity to target them from afar. Worse yet, the convoys seemed dead set on trying to move in a single file, which turned out to be a devastating mistake. If the lead and the rear of the convoy were destroyed, the rest of the vehicles had a much harder time mounting a united defensive front and could be disabled freely. Ukraine managed to take out a convoy that contained 100 vehicles by leveraging this exact strategy, showing just how badly Russia screwed up with its tactical planning. Thirdly, Russia never actually managed to surround Kyiv from all sides. The south of the city remained open to reinforcements, allowing the Ukrainian military to keep a steady supply of ammunition and military equipment flowing in and out of the city. Furthermore, the Ukrainian military could pick off the invading Russians from behind, effectively pincer them against the city. Meanwhile, the area to the north of the city is dominated by the river Dnipro and its tributaries, which were controlled by a series of hydroelectric and irrigation dams. Ukrainians opened several of these dams, drastically changing the landscape around their capital city, with the entryway to the city practically dissected by the river and few entry points remaining to the northwest, where Dnipro's tributaries were flooded. Russia suddenly had a much harder time delivering new supplies to that portion of the front line. Fourthly, the Ukrainians actually had NATO support long before the war officially began. After the annexation of Crimea, Ukraine set about modernizing its military, which also included working closely with NATO to get more modernized equipment. As a part of that, NATO also provided vital military intelligence on Russian movements around Ukraine, which would turn out to be enough to develop an early warning signal for NATO and Ukraine on a possible Russian attack. And while we've discussed at length how Ukraine has received top-notch equipment from NATO during the war, and we'll mention some of those a bit later, the first donations actually started long before February 2022. A statement posted by US and Ukrainian officials in 2018, 4 years before the invasion, included an announcement that the US was supplying anti-tank Javelin systems. In a similar vein, the UK started sending anti-tank NLAWs to Ukraine in January 2022, just a month before the invasion began. This meant that Ukraine was already gearing up to protect its territory and that the subsequent war was probably considered imminent by all parties involved. The Javelins and NLAWs would prove to be as pivotal as Ukrainian tactics, as they could strike Russian military vehicles from afar and create significant pressure on the invading troops. Faced with multiple setbacks, the siege of Kyiv effectively lasted only 1 month and 2 weeks. The Russian military officially retreated on April 8, 2022, and Ukraine claimed that it had liberated the entire north of its territory shortly thereafter. The Russians were forced to reconvene on the Eastern Front in the Donbass area, and they faced a similar set of issues there. With the Ukrainian capital no longer under significant threat, although Russia would continue to use long-range drones and missiles to pelt the city throughout the war, Ukraine could move most of its defenses to the east. The added month and a half of surviving the invasion also allowed NATO to start sending in more equipment. These included a mix of Soviet-era weapons that NATO countries and their allies had in stock, such as modified T-72. Poland, the Netherlands, Denmark, the US, and the Czech Republic donated around 470 overhauled or modified tanks, which Ukraine already had experience working with. More modern weapons, such as newer artillery designs, would prove to be similarly devastating in the Donbass region. Effectively, NATO countries started using the war in Ukraine to test their newer weapons in real-life scenarios. Despite the Russian military failing to create innovative strategies, it still had some of the most modern pieces of military equipment around. This would give NATO actual metrics to work with when designing and improving their arsenals. One example of donated equipment that started to turn the tide actually came in an area in which Ukraine had a definitive disadvantage throughout the war: artillery. Russia is the world's largest producer of both artillery batteries, towed howitzers and self-propelled artillery alike, and artillery rounds, outproducing the entirety of NATO threefold. This meant that it could use quantity-based tactics to create significant pressure and push into Ukraine. France was the one to deliver one of the biggest counters to this strategy, at least during the first months of the war. The Caesar is a French truck-mounted 155mm howitzer equipped with an Advanced Fire Control System, or FCS. It can fire 6 rounds in under 2 minutes before rapidly relocating for safety, although it can remain in position if necessary. With a total capacity of 18 onboard rounds, the Caesar offers exceptional agility and survivability on the battlefield. With the truck using a 6x6 or 8x8 wheeled chassis, the entire system is faster, more maneuverable, and impact resistant than a tracked howitzer, like the ones used by the US and Russia. Furthermore, the digital FCS, the rapid fire rate, and fast deployment and redeployment times allow the Caesar to practically zip in and out of the battlefield. The artillery can arrive at its destination, find its targets, launch rounds, and then be on its way in mere minutes. Add to this the fact that the Caesar has a maximum range of around 25 miles, far more than Soviet-era weapons, and you get a threat that is near the top of its class. This would prevent Russian forces from being able to mount a counterattack by triangulating the source of the fire. The range advantage of the Caesar would be overshadowed by the introduction of ramjet-assisted artillery, which has a theoretical range nearing 100 miles. While Germany and Boeing are advancing ramjet-powered designs, the 155mm shells currently being provided to Ukraine by Rheinmetall have a range of around 100 kilometers or 62 miles and do not include ramjet technology. However, these extended-range shells still offer a significant boost to Ukraine's artillery capabilities, bringing them closer to traditional missiles like ATACMS in terms of reach. Caesar's track record would drill in the 2 pillars of modern warfare: range and mobility. So long as Ukraine could leverage weapons that either outranged or outmaneuvered Russian counterparts, they could stay one step ahead. But there was a third important factor that allowed Ukraine to pull ahead: economics. Ukraine had received more than $250 billion in donations from NATO, whether in direct financial aid or military equipment and ammunition, as well as humanitarian assistance. It allowed the country to funnel its efforts elsewhere and still keep up with Russia's spending, which was about $140 billion in 2024. More importantly, Ukraine managed to make more effective yet cheaper weapons: drones. The war in Ukraine has seen a proliferation of small drones, such as those for recreation and filming, for military purposes. The basic drone could cost at most a few $1,000s, and the larger agricultural drones, which have a higher carrying capacity suitable for mounting anti-tank mines, better ordnance, or more drones, have a cost ranging into the area of tens of thousands.
Do you know what it means to lose everything? Her husband is gone. Her home is gone. She's left with her children and the weight of the world on her shoulder every day.
When combined with the dirt-cheap grenades and anti-tank bombs that were nevertheless effective against vehicles and infantry alike, a single drone usually costs far less than the thing or person it targeted. To make matters worse for Russia, it doesn't have many counters for this type of warfare. Jamming techniques led to a technological arms race between the two countries, in which systems would clash against one another and get redeveloped month after month. Russia could only use dedicated anti-air systems, which cost hundreds of thousands of dollars per missile to strike down a drone. With that, Ukraine launching waves of drones started putting serious dents in Russian military equipment and budgeting. A $10,000 drone destroying a $500,000 tank or getting taken out by a $100,000 missile was always going to be worth the effort for Ukraine. even if they ended up losing 10 drones for each hit. Drone warfare was also how Ukraine has managed to retake control over its coast. The Russian Black Sea Fleet was forced to stop its blockade of the port of Odessa in November 2023 after numerous Ukrainian drone and long-range missile strikes on ships and refueling ports in Crimea. Ukraine also prototyped and deployed the world's first sea kamikaze drone, one designed to swim to its target. The nighttime raids on ships took out the fleet's flagship and destroyed many others. Freeing up sea access would allow Ukraine to revitalize its exports, as it's one of the world's largest exporters of grain. The sea trade returning to its pre-war levels just a year into the war showcased just how little pressure Russia could put on a country that had no navy to speak of. Finally, there's the matter of the aerial advantage Russia supposedly has. In truth, Russia has never really managed to exert air superiority over Ukraine. The air forces conduct most of their missions close to Russian borders, never straying too far out of Russian airspace. This was because NATO has managed to supply Ukraine with a multi-layered anti-air system throughout the country. It's used Patriot batteries and missiles, drones, man-portable launchers, and various surface-to-air missile systems to disable enemy radars, scramble targeting systems, or shoot down drones. Protected by a wide-spreading shield, the engagement range for Russian forces is typically far below the maximum range of each of its constituent parts. And with Russia being the aggressor, every piece of equipment will be under constant threat, as Ukraine can combine its anti-air systems with aircraft and drones to add yet another layer of defense. With a surprising lack of foresight and an over-reliance on systems that haven't stood the test of time, it's fair to say that Russia is performing so badly due to its own lack of innovation in military tactics. And the situation hasn't really improved for Russia since the start of the war. NATO has started sending more modern equipment with every new donation package, and Ukraine has managed to create an actual drone-making industry. Meanwhile, Russia's casualties are mounting to the point where it has to use North Korean soldiers to boost its numbers. It's a sign that the end of the war might be on the horizon. But what do you think? Will Ukraine manage to fully repel Russia? Russia's invasion of Ukraine has hit another deadlock. While Moscow strains for progress, Ukraine's forces are digging in and striking back on multiple fronts. Kyiv's growing confidence raises serious questions. What's driving their bold strategies, and why can't Russia seem to capitalize on its advantages? The answers reveal cracks in Putin's war machine and a looming turning point that could redefine this conflict. Let's dive in. We start with an overview. The first half of 2024 could have been considered the preparatory session for both Russia and Ukraine. While Russia mounted increasing pressure on the eastern front in Donbass, its relatively minor victories throughout the first 6 months of the year weren't noteworthy. In that time, Russia managed to occupy roughly 500 square miles of Ukrainian territory, a tiny amount of progress in a Ukraine where Russia already occupied 18% of the country. However, Russia was preparing to mount a summer campaign. The goal simple. Putin planned to put more pressure on the Kharkiv region, which is fairly far away from the hotly contested Donbass. If the Russian military presence was high enough, Ukraine would be forced to reallocate some of its resources from Donbass to defend Kharkiv. However, Russia made a series of mistakes when launching that summer campaign. The first of those was that its military seemed to be nowhere near prepared to mount a meaningful offensive in Kharkiv. The bulk of the strategy relied not only on long-range artillery, of which Russia has had a definitive advantage over Ukraine throughout the war, but also on infantry, and it wasn't even mechanized infantry squads, supported by Russian tanks. No, Russia's plan for invading Kharkiv seemed to involve infantry on motorbikes, plus makeshift turtle tanks. While the latter has tank in the name, the vehicles were actually scrapped armored vehicles reinforced with whatever metal Russians could find. These terrible substitutes for real tanks could barely attack, and were instead used to divert and absorb Ukrainian fire. The result of the invasion was catastrophic. Ukraine didn't need to divert much of its forces from the Eastern Front. The offensive in Kharkiv was repeatedly repelled with mid-range weaponry, putting relatively little strain on Ukraine's defenses as compared to normal circumstances. Russia didn't manage to make any progress on either front and suffered around 70,000 casualties over the course of just 2 months, at a rate of roughly 1,200 casualties per day. This was a significant jump from the previous year's numbers, which fluctuated around 1,000 casualties per day, at least according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. Then Ukraine unveiled its plans for the summer. At the start of August, a small contingent of Ukrainian soldiers entered the Russian region of Kursk. For the first time, Ukraine was the invading force, and Russia was in the unusual position of defending its own territory. This created a significant shift in the tide of the war to that point. The Kursk invasion was a resounding success, considering it only lasted 3 weeks. In those few weeks, Ukraine occupied roughly 500 square miles of Russian territory, the same amount of area Russia managed to occupy over the previous 7 months, exposing weaknesses in Russia's military along the way. As the Ukrainian soldiers advanced through Kursk, the Russian soldiers in the area swiftly retreated. If that option wasn't possible, they surrendered to the Ukrainians. According to reports from Ukrainian prisons that process prisoners of war, Ukraine captured close to 600 soldiers in Kursk. Out of those, it was estimated that as many as 80% were relatively fresh conscripts, and those conscripts had stories to tell. Interviews with new prisoners of war revealed just how bad the state of Russia's military was at the time. Some prisoners reported that they were given only a week or two of basic combat training before being transported to the front lines. For reference, basic combat training in the US lasts 10 weeks, and according to previous reports, it should last for between 4 and 8 weeks in Russia. The invasion of Kursk also resulted in the forced relocation of at least 200,000 Russian civilians. The Ukrainian government set up a military administration to oversee the occupied territory, and Zelensky boldly claimed that they would try to keep as much of Kursk as possible under their control throughout the rest of the war. To repel the invasion of Kursk, Russia merely relied on building trenches to try and stifle its opponent's progress. Ultimately, no real response came from anywhere within Russia's military for more than a month after the invasion started. It wouldn't be until September 10th, more than 5 weeks after Ukrainians first set foot into Kursk, that Russia would mount a counterattack into the region. More than a month later, on October 14th, Russia's Ministry of Defense announced that its forces had recaptured roughly 50% of the occupied territory. Of course, this is exactly what Ukraine was expecting to happen. Russia's counteroffensive required them to forego some of their vital supply lines on the Eastern Front, delaying its
I can't get hard, not even with the blue pills. Will the salt trick work for me? All right, pay attention. If you're
invasion deeper into Ukraine and buying Ukraine a bit more time. And time is what Ukraine needs most. With the invasion of Kursk called a resounding success by most strategists, Ukraine has managed to secure a significant moral victory over Russia. Shortly after the incursion began, the US and NATO countries announced more waves of financial and military aid to Ukraine. Among those was an additional Patriot anti-air missile system, which has proven to be among the most capable and valuable defensive systems Ukraine has gained access to. Considering that the US had only donated a single Patriot before that, an additional system is a significant increase in defensive potential. This would practically ensure that Russia can't leverage its larger air fleet to control Ukrainian skies. Add to that the fact that the donated F-16s from a few European countries finally started flying in early August, and the invasion of Kursk has allowed Ukraine to secure a much more favorable position going forward. The invasion also presented yet another opportunity to trap Russia, this time diplomatically. A foreign power invading Russia's soil was one of Putin's red lines. Ukraine trampled on that red line alone. The Kremlin's initial responses to the Kursk invasion were muted at best, which gave NATO new opportunities to re-evaluate just how much help it can provide to Ukraine without risking nuclear war. Talk of the use of long-range missiles on Russian territory began, with that talk eventually turning into action. On November 18th, word began circulating that President Joe Biden had given Ukraine permission to use its long-range ATACMS to defend what it had taken in Kursk. Not long after that, similar permission came from the UK for the Storm Shadow missiles Ukraine had been stockpiling, and Ukraine wasted no time taking advantage. By November 19th, a mere day after receiving permission to use ATACMS, Ukraine had fired a volley of 8 of the missiles at an ammunition depot in the Bryansk region. More attacks followed. Ukraine confirmed it had used Storm Shadow missiles in Russia a day later, with senior sources in the country's military dubbing the strike very successful. The message to Putin was clear. Ukraine has long-range missiles, capable of traveling around 150 miles or so to Russian targets, and isn't afraid to use them. In truth, Ukraine had already offered hints that the West was softening on the use of its weapons in Russia. On September 10th, the same day that Russia announced its counteroffensive in Kursk, Ukraine launched one of its biggest and most ambitious long-range drone strikes into Russia's territory yet. The attack involved a total of 144 drones spread between various regions of Russia, with 20 of them going straight for the country's capital, Moscow. While most of those drones were shot down by Russian anti-air defenses, some managed to hit residential buildings, killing 1 person and causing flights to be diverted. However, you have to look at the big picture to understand the true value of the attack. The drone attack on Moscow was the first time that the Russian capital and its citizens had seen the effects of the war of Ukraine. Muscovites were relatively isolated from the war effort, or at least the true extent of it, thanks to the widespread Kremlin propaganda that the government has peddled ever since the so-called special military operation began. With Moscow exposed, Ukraine created an unfavorable situation for Putin. Previously, his reign was bolstered by the fact that the upper classes, particularly oligarchs, stood behind him and supported his expansionist agenda. That oligarchy support is now waning. A large portion of the drone strikes have been oriented not towards military compounds or cities, but oil refineries, which are scattered around Russia in its western regions. This might seem strange at first, considering that some of the largest deposits of Russian oil and gas are in Siberia. However, the oil refineries were set up in the west of the country so they could readily supply Europe with products. Russia has so far focused not on stockpiling oil, but on on-demand processing and delivery of it. This means that striking down oil refineries has severely impacted Russia's ability to export and make money off trade. Russia will struggle to sell these products either domestically or internationally. Both are important. US sanctions on Russian banks introduced in late November 2024 impact payments and transactions related to Russia's oil sales. They are made much harder with the sanctions in place. Add to this domestic struggles. If the Russians are unable to endure the harsh winter without the essentials, the morale and willingness of the entire population to keep fighting in the war will likely plummet. This can lead to repeats of anti-war protests popping up across the country. Returning to the oligarchs, it's also important to note how they are also likely to start working against Putin. Since the oligarchs built up their empires on their connections to the West, particularly via Russia's booming energy sector, these efforts have been pretty much annihilated by sanctions and trade bans. Oligarchs no longer have such a big voice in who trades with Russia. China, India, and Iran have become its closest partners, all of which have far more capability and opportunity to make demands. In fact, Putin has started going so far as to try and dismantle private companies. If his efforts bear fruit, he'll likely lose yet another pillar of support that has existed for decades. That could be enough to turn the oligarchs against him. Even though Putin can try to sustain Russia's economy on the backs of its new trading partners, that doesn't mean that they particularly like Russia staying in the war. China is the prime example. China has quickly risen as Russia's largest trading partner, with bilateral trade between the two nations reaching record highs in 2023 with $240 billion in trade. It has supplanted.
You are using apple cider vinegar the wrong way. If your goal is to lose belly fat, you need to use it the right way. Guys, I discovered a way to turn apple cider vinegar into something even more powerful than those Manjaro pens. Seriously, when you take it the right way, it shrinks your belly, reduces
Europe as the biggest importer of Russian oil and gas. But the country has entrenched its geopolitics with Russia so much that it's now starting to feel the consequences. While China has helped Russia avoid Western sanctions by forwarding trade from other countries and using yuan and rubles instead of dollars, Western banks are starting to apply more pressure on their Chinese counterparts to stop working with Russian companies. As a result, nearly all banks have stopped processing payments from Russia. This can result in Chinese suppliers losing their money from Russian clients. Since Russia exports a large variety of products from China, from electronics and technology to industrial services, severing these connections can cripple the country's manufacturing and service industries. If that happens, Russia will be in serious trouble. Imports vital to sustaining Russia's weapons industry may cease to arrive if China no longer accepts Russian money. Russia's booming energy sector from a few decades ago is now a severely stilted economy, one that relies on the energy sector working at peak efficiency to power everything else. When you combine these factors, there's a possibility that Russia's government will crumble from the inside out. China knows this, which is why it started trying to end the war. President Xi Jinping's outrageous first proposal includes Russia effectively being given full control of the territory it currently occupies in Ukraine. Zelensky won't accept that. But the existence of the proposal at all suggests China may align with the US in trying to push through peace. That brings us to another issue for Russia. Donald Trump won the November presidential elections. Now, President Trump previously indicated that he wanted to end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of coming to office. That clearly hasn't happened, but we do know he has some kind of peace plan. We don't know the exact nature of that plan yet, at least not officially. But if rumors are true, the plan will involve the creation of an 800-mile buffer zone covering the war's front line that separates Kyiv and Moscow's soldiers. That line will be frozen, meaning Ukraine cedes the territory that's already lost, and it will be staffed by European NATO forces supplied by Britain, France, Poland, and others. Ukraine will also need to sacrifice its push for NATO membership for 2 decades. On the surface, that may seem like bad news for Ukraine, but Trump's peace plan would also put a greater strain on a Russian economy that's already almost wholly reliant on wartime production and a faltering energy sector. A ceasefire wouldn't grind that war machine to a halt immediately. Production would continue so Russia can replenish its lost stocks, but stopping the war would mean hundreds of thousands of soldiers returning to a country where little work is available, and the war economy is starting to end amidst interest rates being 21% and inflation standing at 9.5%. It's a perilous economic position for Putin and Russia to find itself in, with Trump's peace plan potentially exacerbating those issues. A short-term loss for Ukraine could evolve into a long-term collapse for Russia. Add the permission Ukraine now has to use long-range missiles against Russia into that mix, and Ukraine has a ton of leverage against Russia in any future peace talks. Through all that, Russia's ability to export oil and gas to China may drop. causing China to default to other exporters to make up the difference. Should that happen, China's position as Russia's biggest ally on the world stage might be called into question. Russia is only useful to China as a golden goose, exporting vital natural resources and keeping Western countries at bay militarily. If Russia's ability to do both of these things stops for any reason whatsoever, there's little motivation for China to maintain its relationship with them. Meanwhile, the other major country that's trading with Russia is becoming more pro-West as we speak. We're talking about India. India re-established the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad, with Australia, Japan, and the US in 2017. The goal of the Quad is to limit China's evolving and growing presence in the Indo-Pacific, and India is a vital player there. Since India controls the western exit of the Strait of Malacca and a good chunk of the Indian Ocean, it can quickly become a blockade on China if things turn sour between the US and China. Furthermore, India has been growing its trade opportunities with Europe and the Middle East. The proposed Middle East corridor is meant to connect the EU with the Middle East and India by bypassing the Red Sea entirely. The corridor is considered to be a significant competitor to China's plans, namely the ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. The BRI's goal is to connect China with over 150 other countries and 30 international organizations. The most important parts of the program involve creating a land route between China and Pakistan, which would bypass India and its claims in the Indian Ocean. Then the route would go from Pakistan to the Middle East through the Arabian Gulf. This would give China access to Middle Eastern oil, while completely ignoring the stranglehold the US and India have on the Strait of Malacca. With the war in Ukraine raging for over 2 years and the COVID pandemic causing significant economic hardships before that, the BRI is nowhere near yielding any meaningful results for China. And so long as Russia is embroiled in a war with Ukraine, there's the risk that countries that might depend on China to be their largest trading partner could start turning towards the West as well. China also doesn't want Russia to lose the war with Ukraine because Putin could lose his seat as the head of state, as he's been the one tethering the two countries for the past decade. This means that China might start applying even more pressure on Russia to end the war by all means necessary, even though they are unable to siphon money or products into Russia as a result of sanctions.
3 reasons why you need this portable welder. Firstly, it makes beautiful welds, and it works with 2 to 32 millimeters electrodes. You can set the current setting right over here. Second, it's super light, and it comes in a full package with a mask and a sledgehammer. The powerful motor can weld continuously for 4 hours. Thirdly, it won't break the bank. Handheld welding machine has 20 to 120 amp adjustable welding output with a simple button design and 6 variable current adjustment, making welding easier. Whether welding sheet or thick plate, you can adjust the welding current according to the need to obtain the ideal welding effect. Welding gun is suitable for 3/30 seconds -1/8, 1.6 to 3.2 millimeters electrodes, allowing you to choose a suitable electrode for different sizes to complete your welding work. Buy now for a limited time offer.
A woman's car broke down. She calls Frost Bank to move some money when her phone dies. Her Frost banker called every gas station in town to see if she was okay. Wow. That's like a movie.
China now finds itself in a bind. Public support of Putin can only stretch so far when China is so reliant on Western trade. But with all that said, what is Russia doing to try and close out the war? Surprisingly, Russia is starting to get increasingly dependent on North Korea for support. North Korea has ended up being one of the largest suppliers of ammunition to Russia. South Korea suggests that North Korea has shipped 6,700 containers to Russia over the span of 6 months in late 2023 and early 2024. The containers could hold as many as 500,000 rounds of 122mm multiple rocket launcher ammunition. By some estimates, roughly half of Russia's artillery shells might actually be coming from North Korea. Russia has also cozied up to North Korea beyond purchasing weapons. The summer of 2024 saw the two countries sign a cooperative defense pact, which Russia is already using to its advantage. Between 11 and 12,000 North Korean troops have already been sent to Russia, with most taking part in a sustained counteroffensive against Ukraine in Kursk. While this might deepen the connection between the two countries and give North Korea far more real-world experience in military conflict, there's another question that should be on your mind. Why is Russia suddenly using North Korean troops? Recent reports from the battlefield might provide an answer. November 2024 was the worst month for Russia in terms of pure personnel losses since the beginning of the war. The country broke its own record for daily troop losses 3 times, culminating in breaking the 2,000 barrier with 2,030 troop casualties on November 28th. Russia also recorded an average daily casualty rate of 1,523 in November, adding up to 45,680 soldiers lost in just 30 days. It was the 5th straight month in which Russia saw its casualty numbers rise. This has likely put a significant strain on the Russian military in terms of manpower. Reports from early 2024 suggest that Russia has signed close to 450,000 military contracts in the previous year. Yet, estimates from Russia analysis website Riddle suggest that the actual number of newly contracted soldiers entering the military might be as low as 200,000. This discrepancy can be explained by Russia using short-term military contracts for prisoners or volunteers, which can last as little as a few months. This can result in a single soldier signing multiple contracts in a single calendar year. Russia also fudges the numbers when it comes to its active military. It's currently processing around 300,000 recruits per year as part of its conscription. Those recruits' mandatory service lasts for a year before they have the option of signing a contract. But Russia is counting on these non-active personnel as active to make itself appear stronger than it really is. At the reports that Russia has turned to using North Korean soldiers who have practically no experience in conflict of this scale, and you get a sign that Russia's situation is even more dire than it seems. Ukraine's capitalization on this, including using long-range missiles inside Russia, has led to Putin signing a new nuclear doctrine. That doctrine essentially gives Russia leeway to strike against Ukraine and any of its nuclear partners in response to any conventional attack Putin believes threatens Russia's sovereignty. Putin is very unlikely to use nuclear weapons. This doctrine change is more like a last throw of the intimidation dice as he realizes that Moscow itself is in danger, as is his entire country due to economic turmoil. As Zelensky has suggested, the next few months are likely to be vital for the war effort. For Russia, this might mean running out of options and being forced to accept a peace deal. But what do you think? How likely is the war to end in a few months, and who is the more likely winner? Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky just told the world a secret. For the first time since Russian President Vladimir Putin's special military operation in Ukraine began back in February 2022, Zelensky has revealed a pair of numbers everybody has been waiting to hear. How many Ukrainian and Russian soldiers have died or been injured in the conflict? He touched on both topics in the past, but we never had an official confirmation of both numbers from either the Ukrainian or Russian sides before. Now we do. And they demonstrate just how shocking Russia's losses are compared to Ukraine's. Zelensky's figures show us that more than 4 Russian soldiers are dying for every 1 Ukrainian fighter, highlighting just how badly Putin has failed to make his numbers advantage count in Ukraine. That brings us to some questions. Just how many Russian soldiers have died compared to Ukrainian ones? And why is Russia's death count so much higher than Ukraine's, given the size and supposed strength of its military? We answer both questions in this video, starting with Zelensky's numbers. On December 8, 2024, Zelensky published a post to the social media platform Telegram. In it, he claimed that 43,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died since February 2022, with a further 370,000 being wounded. It's Zelensky's first full official disclosure of Ukraine's casualty rate, and it shows us just how draining Putin's special military operation has been on the country. Zelensky had hinted at Ukraine's casualty rate before. In February 2024, he told us that 31,000 Ukrainians had died on the battlefield, though he refused to give the number of wounded during that announcement. From that, we can deduce that Ukraine has lost 12,000 of its troops to death over the last 8 months.
Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. It turns out one of the fastest growing segments of people signing up for Mint are people over the age of 55. So I've decided to call our
giving it a rough death rate of around 1,500 soldiers per month. Back in February, Zelensky told the world that he didn't want to deliver too much information to the Kremlin. Now he appears to have changed his tune. And one of the reasons may be that for as draining as the war has been for Ukraine, it's been utterly devastating for Russia. Zelensky also noted that Russia has lost far more of its people than Ukraine. Updated data on Russian losses exceeds 750,000 of their people, Ukraine's president said. This is 198,000 Russians killed and more than 550,000 wounded. It's also 198,000 dead Russians to 43,000 dead Ukrainians, giving us a ratio of just over 4.6 to 1. It gets even worse for Russia. When revealing the numbers, Zelensky was quick to point out that many of Ukraine's injured and wounded recovered and made it back to the battlefield. The 370,000 wounded figure he shared for Ukraine takes into account that in our army, approximately 50% of the wounded return to service, and all injuries are recorded, including minor and repeated ones. In other words, Ukraine's figures are as accurate as they could possibly be. claims Zelensky, even stretching as far as to include injury statistics for those who've been hurt in minor ways that don't prevent them from continuing to fight. These comments could be seen as Zelensky's way of casting doubt on any death or casualty figures Russia releases, with the implication being that Russia may well color its casualty numbers by not recording minor injuries or not counting fighters who got hurt and then returned to the battlefield as casualties at all. Still, the headline here is over 4.6 to 1, 198,000 dead Russians to 43,000 dead Ukrainians. It's worth noting at this point that Zelensky's figures are unverified, at least by the BBC, though they seem to align with estimates provided by Western officials. The BBC says unnamed Western officials put Russia's casualty rate at around 800,000, which roughly aligns with the exceeds 750,000 figure that Zelensky shared. Other sources suggest the Ukrainian death figure may be higher than 43,000. The New York Times says the figure differs sharply from estimates released by several military analysts and US officials, who put the number as being closer to 70,000 dead Ukrainian soldiers back in August 2023. And of course, the Kremlin has disputed any figures that Zelensky shares, with a statement released in the wake of the Ukrainian president's post claiming that Ukrainian losses were many times higher than Russian losses. That seems unlikely, especially if the 198,000 dead figure is accurate. Many times higher would mean that Ukraine has at least 396,000 dead if many times translates to 2 times higher. Presumably Russia means more than that, which would have Ukraine's death total approaching 1 million. Again, that's unlikely. There's no way that Ukraine would have managed to maintain its brave defense against Russia if so many of its soldiers were dying. It wouldn't have an army left. Of course, the Kremlin may also mean that its death and casualty figures are far lower than Ukraine claims, but that ignores all of the evidence being put forth by Ukraine and its Western partners. Either way, there's some debate about the figures, but it's likely that Zelensky is far closer to the real numbers than the Kremlin. And so we come to another question. Why has Zelensky chosen now to share the figures? Part of the reason comes down to US President-elect Donald Trump. It's notable that Zelensky's statement came just a couple of hours after Trump claimed that Ukraine had lost around 400,000 soldiers, though the future president didn't specify how many of those were killed versus wounded. If we return to Zelensky's figures, his number of 43,000 dead and 370,000 wounded align with Trump's statement. Ukraine's president likely threw in the information about how detailed Kyiv's injury recording is and how many of its wounded soldiers returned to the field to soften Trump's number, showing that Ukraine's losses aren't quite as severe as Trump made them appear. It's also worth noting that Trump said that Ukraine has lost many more civilians to Putin's aggression. According to Statista, current numbers of Ukrainian civilian casualties stand somewhere around 12,162 killed and 26,919 wounded as of November 2024. Those are verified casualty figures, and it's possible that there are more unverified civilian deaths and injuries to add to these numbers. So Zelensky likely made his announcement in part both to clarify Trump's figures and because Trump's post had let the cat out of the bag. But there's another possible reason: peace. In his Truth Social post, Trump also said Zelensky and Ukraine would like to make a deal and stop the madness, when prefacing his sharing of the Ukrainian casualty rate. There should be an immediate ceasefire and negotiations should begin, Trump raged. Too many lives are being so needlessly wasted, too many families destroyed, and if it keeps going, it can turn into something much bigger and far worse. Zelensky would like to make a deal. That opinion is backed by Zelensky himself, who told the Japanese Kyodo news agency on December 1st that Ukraine's army currently lacks the strength to push Russia beyond its country's borders. We do have to find diplomatic solutions, he told the outlet. But any peace plan would have to be fair to Ukraine, Zelensky said. If the conflict is frozen without any strong position for Ukraine, then Putin will come back in 2, 3, 5 years. He will come back and he will destroy us completely and utterly, Zelensky told Kyodo. To ensure that just peace,
recently
The following is a conversation with Elon Musk, DJ Saw, Matthew McDougall, Bliss Chapman, and Nolan Arbaugh about Neuralink and the future of humanity. Elon, DJ, Matthew, and Bliss are, of course, part of the amazing Neuralink team, and Nolan is the first human to have a Neuralink device implanted in his brain. I speak with each of them individually, so use timestamps to jump around, or, as I recommend, go hardcore and listen to the whole thing. This is the longest podcast I've ever done. It's a fascinating, super technical, and wide-ranging conversation, and I loved every minute of it. And now, dear friends, here's Elon Musk, his 5th time on this, the Lex Friedman podcast.
Drinking coffee or water?
Water. I'm so over caffeinated right now. Do you want some caffeine?
I mean, sure.
There's a nitro drink.
This will keep you up to like, tomorrow afternoon, basically.
Yeah. I don't have.
So what is nitro? It's just got a lot of caffeine or something?
Don't ask questions. It's called nitro. Do you need to know anything else?
It's got nitrogen in it. That's ridiculous. I mean, what we breathe is 78% nitrogen anyway. What do you need to add more for? Most people think that they're breathing oxygen, and they're actually breathing 78% nitrogen. You need like a milk bar, like from Clockwork Orange.
Yeah. Is that top 3 Kubrick film for you?
Clockwork Orange. It's pretty good. I mean, it's demented, jarring, I'd say.
Okay. Okay. So first, let's step back and big congrats on getting Neuralink implanted into a human. That's a historic step for Neuralink. And
thanks. Yeah.
There's many more to come.
Yeah, we just obviously have our second implant as well.
How did that go?
So far, so good. There looks like we've got, I think, on the order of 400 electrodes that are providing signals. So
nice.
Yeah.
How quickly do you think the number of human participants will scale?
It depends somewhat on the regulatory approval, the rate at which we get regulatory approvals. So we're hoping to do 10 by the end of this year, total of 10. So 8 more.
And with each one, you're going to be learning a lot of lessons about the neurobiology of the brain, the everything, the whole chain of the Neuralink, the decoding, the signal processing, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think it's obviously going to get better with each one. I mean, I don't want to jinx it, but it seems to have gone extremely well with the second implant. So there's a lot of signal, a lot of electrodes. It's working very well.
What improvements do you think we'll see in Neuralink in the coming, let's get crazy, coming years?
I mean, in years, it's going to be gigantic because we'll increase the number of electrodes dramatically. We'll improve the signal processing. So, we even with only roughly, 10-15% of the electrodes working with Nolan, with our first patient, we were able to get to achieve a bits per second. That's twice the world record. So I think we'll start like vastly exceeding the world record by orders of magnitude in the years to come. So start getting to 100 bits per second, 1,000. Maybe if you say like 5 years from now, we might be at a megabit, like faster than any human could possibly communicate by typing or speaking.
Yeah, that BPS is an interesting metric.
Meet Brie. She's always saying, I'll do it someday, constantly burned out with work. Her potential, just sitting there, waiting. Then motion happened. It's like having a personal assistant in her pocket. Someone who knows exactly what she needs before she even knows she needs it. How? AI. Tasks schedule themselves, priorities click, everything aligns. Remember those chaotic days of juggling client calls while chasing your goals? Gone. That constant anxiety about missing deadlines? History. Motion's AI doesn't just schedule.
To measure, there might be a big leap in the experience once you reach a certain level of BPS.
Yeah.
Like entire new ways of interacting with the computer might be unlocked.
And with humans.
With other humans.
Provided they have they want a Neuralink too.
Right.
Otherwise they won't be able to absorb the signals fast enough.
Do you think they'll improve the quality of intellectual discourse?
Well, I think you could think of it, if you were to slow down communication, how do you feel about that? If you'd only talk at, let's say, 1/10 of normal speed, you'd be like, wow, that's agonizingly slow.
Yeah.
So now imagine you could communicate clearly at 10 or 100 or 1,000 times faster than normal.
Listen, I'm pretty sure nobody in their right mind listens to me at 1x. They listen at 2x. So I can only imagine what 10x would feel like, or I could actually understand it.
I usually default to 1.5x. You can do 2x, but actually, if I'm trying to if I'm listening to somebody to in like sort of 15, 20-minute segments to go to sleep, then I'll do it 1.5x. If I'm paying attention, I'll do 2x.
Right.
But actually, if you start actually listen to podcasts or sort of audiobooks or anything if you get used to doing it at 1.5, then 1 sounds painfully slow.
I'm still holding on to 1 because I'm afraid. I'm afraid of myself becoming bored with the reality, with the real world where everyone's speaking in 1x.
Well, it depends on the person. You can speak very fast. Like we can communicate very quickly, and also if you use a wide range of if your vocabulary is larger, your effective bit rate is higher.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
The effective bit rate. I mean, that is the question: is how much information is actually compressed in the low bit transfer of language.
Yeah. If there's a single word that is able to convey something that would normally require 10 simple words, then you've got maybe a 10x compression on your hands. And that's really like with memes. Memes are like data compression. It conveys a whole. You're simultaneously hit with a wide range of symbols that you can interpret, and it's you kind of get it faster than if it were words or a simple picture.
And of course, you're referring to memes broadly, like ideas.
Yeah, there's an entire idea structure that is like an idea template, and then you can add something to that idea template. But somebody has that pre-existing idea template in their head. So when you add that incremental bit of information, you're conveying much more than if you just said a few words. It's everything associated with that meme.
You think there'll be emergent leaps of capability as you scale the number of electrodes? Like there'll be a certain... Do you think there'll be like actual number where it just... The human experience will be altered?
Yes.
What do you think that number might be? Whether electrodes or BPS? We of course don't know for sure, but is this 10,000, 100,000?
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you're anywhere at 10,000 bits per second, I mean, that's vastly faster than any human can communicate right now. If you think of what is the average bits per second of a human, it is less than 1 bit per second over the course of a day, because there are 86,400 seconds in a day, and you don't communicate 86,400 tokens in a day. Therefore, your bits per second is less than 1, averaged over 24 hours. It's quite slow. And now, even if you're communicating very quickly, and you're talking to somebody who understands what you're saying, because in order to communicate, you have to, at least to some degree, model the mind state of the person to whom you're speaking. Then take the concept you're trying to convey, compress that into a small number of syllables, speak them, and hope that the other person decompresses them into a conceptual structure that is as close to what you have in your mind as possible.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of signal loss there in that process.
Yeah, very lossy compression and decompression, and a lot of what your neurons are doing is distilling the concepts down to a small number of symbols of say syllables that I'm speaking, or keystrokes, whatever the case may be. So that's a lot of what your brain computation is doing. Now, there is an argument that that's actually a healthy thing to do or a helpful thing to do, because as you try to compress complex concepts, you're perhaps forced to distill what is most essential in those concepts, as opposed to just all the fluff. So in the process of compression, you distill things down to what matters the most, because you can only say a few things. So that is perhaps helpful. I think we'll probably get, if our data rate increases, it's highly probable that we'll become far more verbose. Just like your computer, when computers had my first computer had 8K of RAM, so you really thought about every byte. And, now you got computers with many gigabytes of RAM. So, if you want to do an iPhone app that just says hello world, it's probably, I don't know, several megabytes minimum, with a bunch of fluff. But nonetheless, we still prefer to have the computer with the more memory and more compute. So the long-term aspiration of Neuralink is to improve the AI-human symbiosis by increasing the bandwidth of the communication. Because even if in the most benign scenario of AI, you have to consider that the AI is simply going to get bored waiting for you to spit out a few words. I mean, if the AI can communicate at terabits per second and you're communicating at, bits per second, it's like talking to a tree.
Well, it is a very interesting question for a super intelligent species. What use are humans?
I think there is some argument for humans as a source of will.
Do this with your credit card statement.
So if you look at the back of your credit card statement, there's actually a section where they tell you how long it'll take you to pay off your balance if you only make minimum payments. It's usually something like 28 years, and you'll pay so much interest over that time period. There's a much faster way to pay off credit card debt, and it doesn't take 28 years. On average, this takes between 30 to 48 months, which is really fast to clear your debt. And you can reduce the total debt you owe by as much as 40%. Plus, monthly payments can even go down. Keep watching this video. I'll explain it all step by step.
Hey, Robert Herjavec from Shark Tank. I'm a huge fan. Hey, what is your #1 tip for saving money?
Easy. Pay off your credit card debt as soon as possible. And there's actually a way to do that without paying the full amount.
What if I can't afford to pay more every month?
You actually don't have to pay more. In fact, your monthly payments go down, and they can go down as much as 40%.
So monthly payments go down, total debt goes down, and I can be out of debt that fast. So what do I need to do?
Thousands of people have done this. It's insane how well it works. Have you seen the video I've made? It explains everything. If you've got credit card debt or personal loan debt, you know it can weigh on you. Those interest rates compound daily. You can keep moving the debt around, maybe take out a personal loan, but eventually it starts to feel like a situation you're never going to get out of. But here's what the credit card companies don't want you to know. You could qualify to get the amount you owe cut by up to 50% just by filling out one form online. It takes about 10 minutes. That's it, if you follow these simple steps. My name's Robert Herjavec, and you probably know me from the hit show Shark Tank, where my job is to help people grow their small business. But this video is about helping people do something even more important: get out of debt. A lot of people don't know this, but my very first job was helping people get out of debt. In fact, I've been helping friends burdened by credit card companies' high interest rates for years. And most of the time, it is not their fault. There's a really simple method that those struggling can use to cut the amount they owe by up to half without taking on more debt. I used to think if you owe 20 grand, you had to pay that full 20 grand, plus a lot more in fees and interest. But now I know that for a lot of people, you could be taking advantage of programs that can eliminate a lot of that principal and interest. This can also reduce your monthly payments significantly, and you could be debt-free in as little as 30 to 48 months. Now look, this is not for everyone. This video will help to explain who qualifies, the pros and cons, and how much money they're saving. The people you're seeing all saved thousands of dollars erased from their debt, and you may be able to as well if you know how. In fact, people who followed these steps ended up paying about 45% less than what they originally owed. That's right, tens of thousands of dollars. People are calling this the debt clearing method. And whether you owe $15,000, $30,000, even $50,000 or more in debt, this could work for you. But no matter how much debt you have, there's one thing I caution against that will keep you in debt for a long time. Debt mistake #1, making minimum payments every month. This is the most common way people handle their debt. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, it's the worst. I learned this firsthand over 30 years ago in Canada, where I grew up. The first job I actually had was at a credit card collection agency. I gotta tell you, I hated it. The people working collections would yell and scream at people, making them feel bad about not being able to pay their bills. But I saw it differently. I didn't grow up with money. My dad swept floors in a factory, and my mom was a receptionist. They were good, hardworking people, just like the people I talked to on the phone with debt. Debt can happen to anyone. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Heck, a lot of the richest people on the planet have dealt with debt. So instead of raising my voice, I would just talk to people and get to know them and try to figure out how to actually help them pay off their debts as fast as possible. I would figure out ways to work with the credit card company on their behalf, get their fees lowered, and a lot of the time, I found ways to help them pay off their debts for way less than what they actually owed. People loved it. And for the next 2 years, I was able to work with the credit card companies to get countless people out of debt. And the first tip I would tell people was always the same: stop making minimum payments. Let's say you have $20,000 in credit card debt. Okay, not too bad. You can probably pay that off in time. But if you make only the minimum payment, it'll take you over 34 years to pay that off. And you'll pay an additional $30,000 in interest. And that's at the low interest rate they start you at. But what happens if you're late on a payment? Interest rates go up, and people often see their monthly payment increase, and in some cases, almost double. They advertise rates as low as 0%. But why do they do that? Because they know that any normal person will eventually make a late payment. It can happen to anyone. Maybe you lost your job, went through a divorce, or had an unforeseen medical issue. Unfortunately, most people think there's nothing they can do about it. So how do we get some relief? One way is debt option number 2, a debt consolidation loan. I know people are really interested in these loans, so let's talk about the pros and cons, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. The pro is you usually turn all those separate debts into one monthly payment, which is nice. And you finally get those creditors off your back, but it's not a perfect solution. You still owe the exact same amount, and you're still paying interest. So this is a good, but not great way of handling personal debt. What I've discovered, and what everyone with debt needs to know about, is that there's a solution that for a lot of people is the best choice of all. It's debt option number 3, debt negotiation. For a lot of people, this is their favorite solution because it accomplishes the 3 things everyone with debt wants. Number 1, you lower your monthly payment immediately. Number 2, you eventually eliminate future interest. And best of all, you can reduce the actual amount of money you owe by 30, 40, even 50%. That's right, you can cut your debt by up to half. And in as little as 30 to 48 months, you can become debt-free. How is that possible? Well, let's start with a secret that most people don't know. Most credit card companies, as well as personal loan companies, have a specific situation in which they will negotiate debt relief with you, even if you owe tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And what's that situation? It's called financial hardship. When you undergo what the banks refer to as a financial hardship, you put them in a tough spot. Many people undergoing financial hardship stop paying the bank completely. They can't even make the minimum monthly payment. Now, the credit card company could raise your rates or tack on late fees, but they're also more open to settling your debt for less than what you owe. And that's when you're in the prime spot to make a deal. The problem is most folks don't have the relationships with the people at these banks to get the best savings. And even if you did, it's a tough negotiation that can take a long time, and they usually don't offer people a good deal at all. That's why I always say the negotiation isn't something most people have the time, the energy, or frankly, the industry know-how to do. But the good news is there's help out there. I was recently introduced to a company that fights for Americans struggling with debt, saving them a lot of money in the process. Specifically, there's a team with high-level relationships at the biggest banks who have cut through the red tape and can get people big savings fast. This is harder than most people think. You see, for years, there were people out there who did negotiate debt relief, but they would charge really high upfront fees. So if you owe $20,000 in debt, they might agree to negotiate with the banks for you, but they might charge you $3,000 in upfront fees before they save people any money at all. To me, that doesn't seem right. But fortunately, new laws have done away with all that, meaning teams can negotiate massive settlements with $0 in upfront fees. Nothing, zero. A free service for Americans until they actually see debt relief. Well, this team has over 10 years of experience negotiating with every bank and loan company you can imagine. They've helped over 300,000 people get out of debt with over $2 billion in debt relieved. They have a 4.9 star rating on Trustpilot on over 15,000 reviews and an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, which is really important to me. They use a method that meets all the goals I have for getting people out of debt. It's called the Debt Clear USA program, and it is amazing. The Debt Clear USA program uses a team of top negotiators to get you the best debt relief possible. Here's how it works. The Debt Clear USA team discovered that by working with people with $7,500 or more in debt, they could negotiate much better deals by cutting through the red tape and talking directly with these banks to get people the savings they deserve. Currently, the Debt Clear USA team is achieving an average of 45% aggregate discount on debts. Imagine that, 45% of your total debt erased. And some settlements are higher, as high as 50% off. That's right, up to half of your debt vanishing just through this negotiating team. Not only that, the Debt Clear USA program actually lowers your monthly payment, and here's the best part. No more interest. That's right. As soon as a settlement is reached, the interest stops completely. And about 25% of the team's clients see their first settlement just 30 days from their first program deposit. That means you could be just months away from saving thousands of dollars. And of course, with lower monthly payments and a large portion of your debt eliminated, you could be debt-free in 30 to 48 months, just like all the people you're seeing right now. I know you're probably wondering if you qualify and how you can take advantage of what for many people could be the best program ever for getting rid of debt. So let's talk about who qualifies, how this works, and how you can get that debt off your back starting today. First off, the Debt Clear USA team of negotiators are the best. Currently, the Debt Clear USA program is only able to work with people who have $7,500 or more in debt and have an established financial hardship. That's also part of why they're getting these unbelievable settlements. In the future, the Debt Clear USA team would love to work with anyone who has any amount of debt. But for right now, you need $7,500 or more of debt to apply. So if you want to see if you qualify and have the Debt Clear USA negotiators fight for you, there's actually a really simple sign-up funnel you'll see at the bottom of this video. Just click the Learn More button below and we'll get started. When you click the link, you'll be taken to the Debt Clear USA website. You'll also see a bunch of helpful information about what debt settlement is and all the people who have saved thousands with this process. Next, you'll answer a few questions with your name, how much debt you have, and a phone number that your Debt Clear USA specialist can contact you at. Then just click Get Started. If you pre-qualify for the program, you'll see a thank you page, and you can either call the Debt Clear team immediately or schedule a call for any time you like to complete your qualification. You'll get a call back at the time you choose, and you'll learn exactly how the process works from one of Debt Clear USA's debt specialists. And they'll help you decide if Debt Clear USA is right for you. Now, let's talk about what happens if you are accepted into the Debt Clear USA program. Like I said, the way they negotiate these amazing deals is by telling credit card companies about the financial hardship you're experiencing. The result of financial hardship is that you can no longer make your minimum payment. Then the banks are scared they're never going to collect any money from you again, and it puts them in a tough spot where they want to negotiate. How long do you stop making payments for? Well, it depends on which credit card or personal loan companies your debt is with. But typically, the amount of time to stop making payments is 4 to 6 months before the Debt Clear USA team can negotiate with your first creditor. Now, this brings us to an important point everyone needs to be aware of. When you stop making payments, your credit score will go down. But here's the good news. This is temporary. Once your debt is settled, your credit score should start to improve. So when this is all done, you could potentially save thousands of dollars, achieve financial freedom, and have a good credit score again. So how long does that take? Well, when you stop making minimum payments, the idea is to take that money and start saving it to make an offer to the banks. Through the Debt Clear USA program, an FDIC-insured dedicated savings account will be created for you, where you can build up a nice pile of cash to pay off those cards. This account is 100% your money. You control it. No funds ever leave the account without your approval. And You can cancel the program at any time with no penalty. Let's say that again. If you decide you don't want to go through with any settlements, you can cancel the program at any time with absolutely no program fees. They create a great client portal that allows you to watch that account fill up, and when it reaches an amount they think is enough to make a deal, they start negotiating. So let's give a real example of what this looks like. Let's say you have a $10,000 balance on 3 different credit cards. When you enroll in the Debt Clear USA program, you stop paying your minimum payment immediately if you haven't already, and you start putting money in your dedicated savings account. For a few months, your credit score goes down, and the banks may call you and try to get you to make a payment. I know people sometimes feel nervous about this. That's why the Debt Clear USA team is available 7 days a week if you want to call, text, email, or simply ask questions, and they're going to support you to make sure you have everything you need. Debt relief is a great thing to do. In about 6 months, let's say you've saved up a few $1,000s. The Debt Clear USA team will get to work. The team will reach out to the first card and start the negotiation. They haven't gotten anything from you in 6 months, so they're itching to get some money, oftentimes much less than what you previously owed. The Debt Clear USA team negotiates a settlement, and when they feel like they've gotten the absolute best deal, they contact you by phone, email, and through the client portal with the offer. Great news. Your $10,000 debt is now just $6,000. We reduced it by 40%. Want us to finalize this deal and save you $4,000? If it looks good to you, you sign off and the debt is now gone. By the way, even if you don't have enough to pay off the full settlement amount right away, Debt Clear USA can negotiate a payment plan. This also helps them negotiate more settlements for you at the same time. But the best part is this payment plan will stop all new interest from accruing. You pay one smaller amount, that's it. So you didn't just save $4,000. You saved all the money in fees, charges, and interest the credit card company was going to tack on over the next few years. And then the Debt Clear USA team repeats that process 1, 2, as many times as you need to pay off each and every debt you've enrolled in the program. Just look at all these real settlement letters the Debt Clear USA team's clients have received. They send thousands and thousands of these letters a month. Look at the savings people are getting every day. Imagine your name being on one of those letters and thousands of dollars of your debt being erased. And if you've got personal loans, guess what? The Debt Clear USA team are experts at negotiating with them too. By the way, only you control the money in your account. You alone approve settlements, and you can cancel the program at any time, risk-free. You can even use the client portal to check the status of your account, your settlement details, anything you want, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And let me say this again. You will never pay a dime in fees until your debt is settled. And once you see that first settlement, you're going to want to keep doing this again and again until all your debts are gone. A question you might have is, once you enroll in the Debt Clear USA program, can you still get a consolidation loan? The answer is yes. In fact, the Debt Clear USA team can help you get a loan, but it makes so much sense to use Debt Clear USA first. Get that total amount of debt knocked down 30, 40, even 50%. Then think about getting a loan if you want to pay those cards off faster. Once you're enrolled, the Debt Clear USA team will talk all of this out with you to make sure you're fully prepared and excited to start this journey. And however long it takes, you're going to sleep so much better at night knowing you're moving closer to being debt-free every day. That's the goal. Not just to save you thousands of dollars, which, let's be honest, that part is great, but even more importantly, to feel that stress lifted starting on day one, knowing you finally got a team of experts on your side who won't quit until the job is done. Listen, I know how heavy debt can be. It affects every facet of your life, knowing there's this cloud hanging over your finances. It can make you lose sleep, lose confidence. It's almost like having a health problem and knowing you have to see the doctor, but you keep putting it off. And every day it goes on, those interest rates pile up and the debt gets bigger and bigger. Eventually, it feels like a mountain of a problem hanging over your head that someday is going to crush you. But take it from me, your current situation is not your forever. The great thing about life is that we're defined not by what happened yesterday, but what we do tomorrow. And all you need to do is take one step. Click the Learn More button below and start the application process for the Debt Clear USA program. You'll be in the hands of the best team in the industry and a team of experts who fight for you, not the banks. The deals they're seeing are seriously life-changing. On the website, you'll see thousands of people who have already done this process talking about the unbelievable results they've gotten. They've taken back control of their lives. What would you do with these savings and a debt-free life? The money you save could be used for a vacation you've been putting off, a new car, even a down payment on a house. Some people have been able to go back to school or start a new business once they finally get their financial health under control and their credit score higher than ever. Maybe you just want to sleep better at night, knowing your bank account is getting bigger every year, knowing that every dollar you earn is going to you, not some big bank's interest rate. Whatever your financial goals are, you can achieve them if you get your debts resolved once and for all. And with thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars in savings that you thought you would never see again. So if you're ready to join thousands of other people who've eliminated their debt, don't wait 1 second longer. Click the Learn More button below and let's get started erasing your debts for good. But don't wait. The Debt Clear USA program is exclusively offered through this video and the Debt Clear USA website. If you don't take advantage of this program now, you may end up regretting it. So click the Learn More button and get started right now. Remember, after you sign up, you'll be getting emails checking in to see how it's going and to offer tips for saving up even faster. And when you finally regain your financial freedom, and with this program, that could be really soon, send an email to share how it feels to finally have that weight off your back. Honestly, hearing from people about how they've taken back control of their lives thanks to this program is, for me, one of the best feelings in the world. Don't forget, there's no commitments or anything, and you can stop the program at any time. Congrats on watching this video. You now know things that most people with debt will never know. So if you or anyone you know is struggling with debt and can't seem to get out of it, tell them what Robert Herjavec said. These banks are not in control. You are. Thanks for letting Debt Clear USA team fight for you. Hey, still watching? While you're here, let me answer the most common questions people ask me about the Debt Clear USA program. Can I use my credit cards while I'm enrolled in the program? Debt Clear USA doesn't recommend it because it can negatively impact how big a settlement your team can get. So, if possible, people use a credit card they don't have enrolled in the program. Can the Debt Clear USA team settle my debt if it gets sold to a third party? Great question. Some clients have a debt that's already been sold to a third-party collection agency. Like I told you before, my first job was working for one of these companies, and I hated the way they would try and harass people into paying when they know the sky-high fees the creditor charged or how that debt got so high in the first place. Well, the good news is, yes, the Debt Clear USA team will negotiate with these collection agencies. Actually, sometimes they get even bigger deals from third-party settlements. Will I get new credit card offers after I settle my debt? I know if you're like me, you ultimately do want to have access to great credit cards. Everyone loves racking up as many reward points as they can. But here's the good news. If you enroll and resolve all your debts, you should be able to apply for new credit cards and get all the amazing perks that come with them. One last question. Can I negotiate directly with the credit card companies? You can certainly try, but it is really not recommended. Firstly, they are experts at avoiding settlements. This is why the Debt Clear USA program was created. It's not just that these negotiators can get you the best deal possible. They have over 10 years of experience with over 1,000 creditors. They know exactly what documentation to ask for to make sure banks can never back out of a settlement once they agree. And they provide that information on your client portal so you can see every detail. The Debt Clear USA team doesn't just settle your debts, they make it easy. You sign up and your Debt Clear USA team handles the rest. That's why these incredible negotiators were trusted to settle over 15,000 debts last month alone. It's how they've saved clients over $1 billion with more grateful clients added every day. And you're about to be one of them. So let me be the first to welcome you to the Debt Clear USA program. I'm proud of you for taking control of your debt and can't wait to hear about all the amazing things you do with your new financial freedom.
I'm Noel Honig, and I'm a director and a designer. I like to animate collages, so I like to work with photographic elements to shapes to type. This collage that I'm currently working on involves stock photos, textures that I brushed on myself, type, and some hand-drawn elements that I put in.
Will.
Will, yeah. It's also will or purpose. So if you consider the human mind as being essentially there's the primitive limbic elements, which basically even like reptiles have, and there's the cortex, that's the thinking and planning part of the brain. Now the cortex is much smarter than the limbic system, and yet is largely in service to the limbic system. It's trying to make the limbic system happy. I mean, the sheer amount of compute that's gone into people trying to get laid is insane. Without actually seeking procreation. They're just literally trying to do this sort of simple motion. And they get a kick out of it.
Yeah.
So this simple, which in the abstract, rather absurd motion, which is sex, the cortex is putting a massive amount of compute into trying to figure out how to do that.
So like 90% of distributed compute of the human species is spent on trying to get laid, probably. Like
a massive
large
amount.
percentage.
Yeah. There's no purpose to most sex except hedonistic. It's just sort of joy or whatever, dopamine release. Now, once in a while it's procreation, but for humans, it's mostly, modern humans, it's mostly recreational. So your cortex, much smarter than your limbic system, is trying to make the limbic system happy because the limbic system wants to have sex. So, or wants some tasty food or whatever the case may be. And then that is then further augmented by the tertiary system, which is your phone, your laptop, iPad, whatever, all your computing stuff. That's your tertiary layer. So you're actually already a cyborg. You have this tertiary compute layer, which is in the form of your computer with all the applications, all your compute devices. And so in the getting laid front, there's actually a massive amount of digital compute also trying to get laid. With like Tinder and whatever,
Yeah. So the compute that we humans have built is also participating.
Yeah. I mean, there's like gigawatts of compute going into getting laid, of digital compute.
Yeah. What if AGI was...
This is happening as we speak.
If we merge with AI, it's just going to expand the compute that we humans use.
Pretty much.
To try to get laid.
It's one of the things, certainly, yeah.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that yes, like is there a use for humans? Well, there's this fundamental question of what's the meaning of life? Why do anything at all? And so if our simple limbic system provides a source of will to do something, that then goes to our cortex, that then goes to our, tertiary compute layer, then, I don't know, it might actually be that the AI in a benign scenario is simply trying to make the human limbic system happy.
Yeah, it seems like the will is not just about the limbic system. There's a lot of interesting, complicated things in there. We also want power.
That's limbic too, I think.
But then we also want to, in a kind of cooperative way, alleviate the suffering in the world.
Not everybody does, but yeah, sure. Some people do.
As a group of humans, when we get together, we start to have this kind of collective intelligence that is more complex in its will than the underlying individual descendants of apes, right? So there's like other motivations, and that could be a really interesting source of an objective function for AGI.
Yeah. I mean, there are these sort of fairly cerebral or kind of higher level goals. I mean, for me, it's like, what's the meaning of life? Or understanding the nature of the universe is of great interest to me, and hopefully to the AI. And that's the mission of XAI and Grok, is understand the universe.
So do you think people, when you have a Neuralink with 10,000, 100,000 channels, most of the use cases will be communication with AI systems?
Well, if it's assuming that they're not, I mean, there's solving basic neurological issues that people have. You know, if they've got damaged neurons in their spinal cord or neck, or as is the case with our first two patients, then this obviously the first order of business is solving fundamental neuron damage in the spinal cord, neck, or in the brain itself. So, our second product is called Blindsight, which is to enable people who are completely blind, lost both eyes or optic nerve, or just can't see at all, to be able to see by directly triggering the neurons in the visual cortex. So we're just starting at the basics here. So it's like the simple stuff, relatively speaking, is solving neuron damage.
Everyone deserves a fast and reliable connection, one that helps better their everyday through the things they value most: friends and family, education and career. A connection that opens pathways to opportunity and builds roads to a better future. At Spectrum, we're committed to delivering just that every single day. Because with the right connection, anything is possible. That's Life Unlimited. That's Spectrum.
It can also solve, I think, probably schizophrenia. If people have seizures of some kind, it could probably solve that. It could help with memory. There's like a kind of a tech tree, if you will, of like you got the basics. Like you need literacy before you can have, Lord of the Rings.
Got it.
Do you have letters and alphabet? Okay, great. Words, then eventually you get sagas. So, I think there may be some, things to worry about in the future, but the first several years are really just solving basic neurological damage. Like for people who have essentially complete or near complete loss from the brain to the body, like Stephen Hawking would be an example, the Neuralink would be incredibly profound. Because, you can imagine if Stephen Hawking could communicate as fast as we're communicating, perhaps faster. And that's certainly possible. Probable, in fact. Likely, I'd say.
So there's a kind of dual track of medical and non-medical, meaning, so everything you've talked about could be applied to people who are non-disabled in the future.
The logical thing to do is, sensible thing to do is to start off solving basic neuron damage issues.
Yes.
Because there's obviously some risk with the new device. You can't get the risk down at zero. It's not possible. So you want to have the highest possible reward, given there's a certain irreducible risk. And if somebody's able to have a profound improvement in their communication, that's worth the risk.
As you get the risk down.
Yeah, as you get the risk down, and once the risk is down to if you have like thousands of people that have been using it for years, and the risk is minimal, then perhaps at that point you could consider saying, okay, let's aim for augmentation. Now I think we're actually going to aim for augmentation with people who have neuron damage. So we're not just aiming to give people a communication data rate equivalent to normal humans. We're aiming to give people who have, quadriplegic or maybe have complete loss of the connection to the brain and body, a communication data rate that exceeds normal humans. While we're in there, why not? Let's give people superpowers.
And the same for vision. As you restore vision, there could be aspects of that restoration that are superhuman.
Yeah, at first the vision restoration will be low res, because you have to say like how many neurons can you put in there and trigger, and you can do things where you adjust the electric field. So like even if you've got say 10,000 neurons, it's not just 10,000 pixels, because you can adjust the field between the neurons and do them in patterns in order to get, so have say 10,000 electrodes effectively give you, I don't know, maybe like having a megapixel or a 10 megapixel situation. So, and then over time, I think you get to higher resolution than human eyes, and you could also see in different wavelengths. So like Geordie LaForge from Star Trek, you know, like the thing. You could just, like, do you want to see in radar? No problem. You can see ultraviolet, infrared, eagle vision, whatever you want.
Do you think there'll be, let me ask a Joe Rogan question. Do you think there'll be, I just recently taken ayahuasca. Do you think,
Is that a
so this question? No. Well, yes.
Well, I guess technically it is.
Yeah. Have
Yeah,
you tried,
DMT
ever tried
in there or
DMT,
something?
bro? I love you, Joe. Okay. But
yeah, wait, yeah. Have you said much about it? The
I have
ayahuasca
not.
stuff?
I have not. I've been
Okay. Well, why don't you spill the beans?
It was a truly incredible.
Don't turn the tables on you.
Wow.
I mean, you're in the jungle.
Yeah, amongst the trees, myself.
Yeah, it must have been crazy.
And the shaman. Yeah. With the insects, with the animals all around you, like jungle as far as I can see.
I mean,
that's the way to do it.
Things are gonna look pretty wild.
Yeah, pretty wild. I took an extremely high dose.
Just don't go hugging an anaconda or something, you know.
You haven't lived unless you made love to an anaconda. I'm sorry, but
snakes and ladders.
Yeah, it was. I took extremely high dose of 9 cups and.
Damn. Okay, that sounds like a lot. Like, what's the is normal just 1 cup or
1 or 2? Well, usually 1. Yeah.
You went.
Yeah.
Wait, like right off the bat, or do you work your way up to it?
For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now, and the best partner is the one who can deliver. That's why millions of maintenance and repair pros trust Grainger, because we have professional-grade supplies for every industry, even hard-to-find products. And we have same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders. But most importantly, we have an unwavering commitment to help keep you up and running. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
So I
you just jumped in at the deep end.
across 2 days, because the first day I took 2, and
Okay.
it was a ride, but it wasn't quite like a.
It wasn't like a revelation.
It wasn't into deep space type of ride. It was just like a little airplane ride. I saw some trees and some visuals and all that. I just saw a dragon and all that kind of stuff. But
at 9 cups, you went to Pluto, I think.
Pluto, yeah. No, deep space.
Deep space.
No, one of the interesting aspects of my experience is I thought I would have some demons, some stuff to work through.
That's what people.
That's what everyone says.
No one ever says. Yeah, exactly.
I had nothing. I had all positive. I had just so
just
full.
a pure soul.
I don't think so. I don't know. But I kept thinking about it. It had like extremely high resolution.
Okay.
Thoughts about the people I know in my life. You were there.
Okay.
It was just, and it's just. Not from my relationship with that person, but just as the person themselves, I had just this deep gratitude of who they are.
That's cool.
It was just like this exploration, like, you know, like Sims or whatever. You get to watch them.
Sure.
I got to watch people and just be in awe of how amazing they are.
It sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's great. I was waiting for.
When's the demon coming?
Exactly. Maybe I'll have some negative thoughts. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. I had just extreme gratitude for them. And then also a lot of space travel.
Space travel to where?
So here's what it was. It was people, the human beings that I know, they had this kind of, well, the best way to can describe it is they had a glow to them.
Okay.
And then I kept flying out from them to see Earth, to see our solar system, to see our galaxy. And I saw that light, that glow all across the universe.
Okay.
Like that whatever that form is.
All right.
Whatever that
did you go past the Milky Way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're like intergalactic.
Yeah, intergalactic.
Okay, dang.
Yeah. But always pointing in.
Okay.
Yeah. past the Milky Way, past. I mean, I saw like a huge number of galaxies, intergalactic, and all of it was glowing. So, but I couldn't control that travel because I would actually explore near distances to the solar system, see if there's aliens or any of that kind of stuff. No, I didn't know. No.
Zero aliens?
Implication of aliens because they were glowing. They were glowing in the same way that humans were glowing. That that like life force that I was seeing, the thing that made humans amazing was there throughout the universe. Like there was these glowing dots. So I don't know. It made me feel like there's life. No, not life, but something, whatever makes humans amazing all throughout the universe.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it was amazing. No demons. No demons. I looked for the demons. There's no demons. There were dragons, and they're pretty awesome. So the thing about trees.
Was there anything scary at all?
Dragons, but they weren't scary. They were They were protective. So the thing is,
Puff the Magic Dragon.
No, it was more like Game of Thrones kind of dragons. They weren't very friendly. They were very big. So the thing is about giant trees at night, which is where I was.
I mean, the jungle's kind of
scary.
Yeah.
The trees started to look like dragons, and they were all like looking at me.
Sure. Okay.
And it didn't seem scary. They seemed like they were protecting me. And they, the shaman and the people didn't speak any English, by the way, which made it even scarier. Because we're not even like, we're worlds apart in many ways. It just, but yeah, there was not. They talk about the mother of the forest protecting you, and that's what I felt like.
And you're way out in the jungle.
Way out. This is not like a tourist retreat.
Like 10 miles outside of Rio or something.
No, we went. No, this is not a.
You're
this
deep,
is not
deep
a
Amazon.
So me and this guy named Paul Rosalie, who basically is Tarzan. He lives in the jungle. We went out deep, and we just went crazy.
Wow,
yeah.
cool.
Yeah. So anyway, can I get that same experience in a Neuralink?
Probably, yeah.
I guess that is the question for non-disabled people. Do you think that there's a lot in our perception, in our experience of the world that could be explored, that could be played with using Neuralink?
Yeah, I mean, Neuralink it's really a generalized input-output device. It's reading electrical signals and generating electrical signals. And I mean, everything that you've ever experienced in your whole life, smell, emotions, all of those are electrical signals. So it's kind of weird to think that your entire life experience is distilled down to electrical signals from neurons, but that is in fact the case. If that's at least what all the evidence points to. So, I mean, if you trigger the right neuron, you could trigger a particular scent. You could certainly make things glow. I mean, do pretty much anything. I mean, really, you can think of the brain as a biological computer. So if there are certain, say, chips or elements of that biological computer that are broken, let's say your ability to, if you've got a stroke, if you've had a stroke, that means you've got some part of your brain is damaged. Let's say it's a speech generation or the ability to move your left hand, that's the kind of thing that a Neuralink could solve. If you've got like a massive amount of memory loss that's just gone, well, we can't get the memories back. We could restore your ability to make memories, but we can't, restore memories that are fully gone. Now I should say, if part of the memory is there, and the means of accessing the memory is the part that's broken, then we could re-enable the ability to access the memory. So, but you can think of it like RAM in in a computer. If the RAM is destroyed or your SD card is destroyed, we can't get that back. But if the connection to the SD card is destroyed, we can fix that. If it is fixable physically, then then it can be fixed.
Of course, with AI, you can repair photographs and fill in missing parts of photographs. Maybe you can do the same.
You could say like create the most probable set of memories based on all information you have about that person. You could then it would be probabilistic restoration of memory. Now we're getting pretty esoteric here,
but that is one of the most beautiful aspects of the human experience, is remembering the good memories. Like we live most of our life, as Danny Kahneman has talked about, in our memories, not in the actual moment. We're collecting memories and we kind of relive them in our head. And that's the good times. If you just integrate over our entire life, it's remembering the good times.
Sure.
That produces the largest amount of happiness. And so...
Yeah, well, I mean, what are we but our memories? And what is death but the loss of memory? Loss of information. If you could say like, well, if you could be, you run a thought experiment, what if you were disintegrated painlessly and then reintegrated a moment later, like teleportation, I guess, provided there's no information loss. The fact that your one body was disintegrated is irrelevant.
And memories is just such a huge part of that.
Death is fundamentally the loss of information, the loss of memory.
So if we can store them as accurately as possible, we basically achieve a kind of immortality.
Yeah.
You've talked about the threats, the safety concerns of AI. Let's look at long-term visions. Do you think Neuralink is, in your view, the best current approach we have for AI safety?
It's an idea that may help with AI safety. Certainly not. I wouldn't want to claim it's like some panacea or something. That's a sure thing. But I mean, many years ago, I was thinking like, well, what would inhibit alignment of collective human will with artificial intelligence? And the low data rate of humans, especially our slow output rate, would necessarily just, because the communication is so slow, would diminish the link between humans and computers. Like the more you are a tree, the less you know what the tree is. Like, let's say you look at a tree, you look at this plant or whatever, and like, hey, I'd really like to make that plant happy, but it's not saying a lot, you know?
Mm-hmm. So the more we increase the data rate that humans can intake and output, then that means the better, the higher the chance we have in a world full of AGIs.
Yeah. We could better align collective human will with AI if the output rate especially was dramatically increased. And I think there's potential to increase the output rate by, I don't know, 3, maybe 6, maybe more orders of magnitude. So it's better than the current situation.
And that output rate would be by increasing the number of electrodes, number of channels, and also maybe implanting multiple neural links.
Yeah.
Do you think there will be a world in the next couple of decades where it's hundreds of millions of people have neural links?
Yeah, I do.
Do you think when they see the capabilities, the superhuman capabilities that are possible, and then the safety is demonstrated?
Yeah, if it's extremely safe, and you have and you can have superhuman abilities, and let's say you can upload your memories, so you wouldn't lose memories, then I think probably a lot of people would choose to have it. It would supersede the cell phone, for example. I mean, it's the biggest problem that a phone has is trying to figure out what you want. So that's why you've got autocomplete, and you've got output, which is all the pixels on the screen. But from the perspective of the human, the output is so friggin' slow. Desktop or phone is desperately just trying to understand what you want. And there's an eternity between every keystroke from a computer standpoint.
Yeah.
So
the computer's talking to a tree, a slow-moving tree that's trying to swipe.
Yeah. So if you had computers that are doing trillions of instructions per second, and a whole second went by, I mean, that's a trillion things it could have done. You know?
Yeah, I think it's exciting and scary for people because once you have a very high bit rate, that changes the human experience in a way that's very hard to imagine.
Yeah, we would be something different. I mean, some sort of futuristic cyborg. I mean, we're obviously talking about, by the way, like it's not like around the corner. It's, you asked me what the distant future is. Like, maybe this is like, it's not super far away, but 10, 15 years, that kind of thing.
When can I get one? 10 years?
Probably less than 10 years. Depends what you want to do, you know.
Hey, if I can get like 1,000 BPS,
1,000 BPS,
and it's safe, and I can just interact with the computer while laying back and eating Cheetos. I don't eat Cheetos. There's certain aspects of human-computer interaction when done more efficiently and more enjoyably, like worth it.
Well, we feel pretty confident that I think maybe within the next year or two that someone with a Neuralink implant will be able to outperform a pro gamer.
Nice.
Because the reaction time would be faster.
I got to visit Memphis.
Yeah.
You're going big on compute.
Yeah.
And you've also said play to win or don't play at all. So
yeah.
What does it take to win?
For AI, that means you've got to have the most powerful training compute. And the rate of improvement of training compute has to be faster than everyone else, or you will not win. Your AI will be worse.
So how can Grok, let's say 3, that might be available, like next year?
Well, hopefully end of this year.
Grok 3.
If we're lucky, yeah.
How can that be the best LLM, the best AI system available in the world? How much of it is compute? How much of it is data? How much of it is like post-training? How much of it is the product that you package it up in? All that kind of stuff.
I mean, they won't matter. It's sort of like saying what you know, let's say it's a Formula One race, like what matters more, the car or the driver? I mean, they both matter. If your car is not fast, then, you know, if it's like, let's say it's half the horsepower of your competitors, the best driver will still lose. If it's twice the horsepower, then probably even a mediocre driver will still win. So the training computer is kind of like the engine. There's horsepower of the engine. So you want to try to do the best on that, and then so how efficiently do you use that training compute, and how efficiently do you do the inference, the use of the AI? So obviously that comes down to human talent, and then what unique access to data do you have? That's also plays a role.
You think Twitter data will be useful?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the leading AI companies have already scraped all the Twitter data. Not I think they have. So on a go forward basis, what's useful is the fact that it's up to the second. You know, that's because it's hard for them to scrape in real time. So there's an immediacy advantage that Grok has already. I think with Tesla and the real time video coming from several million cars, ultimately tens of millions of cars, with Optimus, there might be hundreds of millions of Optimus robots, maybe billions, learning a tremendous amount from the real world. That's the biggest source of data. I think ultimately is sort of Optimus. Probably Optimus is going to be the biggest source of data
because
reality scales. Reality scales to the scale of reality. It's actually humbling to see how little data humans have actually been able to accumulate. Really, if you say how many trillions of usable tokens have humans generated, where on a non-duplicative, like discounting spam and repetitive stuff, it's not a huge number. You run out pretty quickly.
And Optimus can go, so Tesla cars unfortunately have to stay on the road. Optimus robot can go anywhere. There's more reality off the road and go off road.
I mean, like the Optimus robot can like pick up the cup and see, did it pick up the cup in the right way? Did it, say, pour water in the cup? Did the water go in the cup or not go in the cup? Did it spill water or not?
Yeah.
Simple stuff like that. I mean, but it can do that at scale times a billion, so generate useful data from reality. So cause and effect stuff.
What do you think it takes to get to mass production of humanoid robots like that?
It's the same as cars, really. I mean, global capacity for vehicles is about 100 million a year. And it could be higher. It's just that the demand is on the order of 100 million a year. And then there's roughly 2 billion vehicles that are in use in some way. So, which makes sense. Like the life of a vehicle is about 20 years. So at steady state, you can have 100 million vehicles produced a year with a 2 billion vehicle fleet, roughly. Now, for humanoid robots, the utility is much greater. So my guess is humanoid robots are more like at a billion plus per year.
But, until you came along and started building Optimus, it was thought to be an extremely difficult problem. I mean, it still is an extremely difficult problem.
So it's no walk in the park. I mean, Optimus currently would struggle to walk in the park. I mean, it can walk in a park, but park is not too difficult. But it will be able to walk over a wide range of terrain.
Yeah, and pick up objects.
Yeah. It can already do that.
But like all kinds of objects.
Yeah.
All foreign objects. I mean, pouring water in a cup is not trivial. Because then if you don't know anything about the container, it could be all kinds of containers.
Yeah, there's going to be an immense amount of engineering just going into the hand.
Yeah.
The hand might be close to half of all the engineering in Optimus. From an electromechanical standpoint, the hand is probably roughly half of the engineering.
But so much of the intelligence of humans goes into what we do with our hands.
Yeah.
Like the manipulation of the world, manipulation of objects in the world. Intelligent, safe manipulation of objects in the world, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you start really thinking about your hand and how it works.
I do all the time.
The sensory and control homunculus is, we have humongous hands.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like your hands, the actuators, the muscles of your hand are almost overwhelmingly in your forearm.
Mm-hmm.
So your forearm has the muscles that actually control your hand. There's a few small muscles in the hand itself, but your hand is really like a skeleton meat puppet, and with cables so the muscles that control your fingers are in your forearm, and they go through the carpal tunnel, which is that you've got a little collection of bones and a tiny tunnel that these cables, the tendons, go through, and those tendons are mostly what moves your hands.
And something like those tendons has to be re-engineered into the Optimus in order to do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so like the current Optimus, we tried putting the actuators in the hand itself, but then you sort of end up having these like
giant hands.
Yeah, giant hands that look weird.
Yeah,
and then they don't actually have enough degrees of freedom or enough strength. Mm-hmm. So then you realize, okay, that's why you got to put the actuators in the forearm, and just like a human, you got to run cables through a narrow tunnel to operate the fingers. And there's also a reason for not having all the fingers the same length. So it wouldn't be expensive from an energy or evolutionary standpoint to have all your fingers be the same length. So why aren't they the same length?
Yeah, why not?
Because it's actually better to have different lengths. Your dexterity is better if you've got fingers of different length. There are more things you can do, and your dexterity is actually better if your fingers are of different length. Like there's a reason we've got a little finger. Like why not have a little finger this bigger?
Yeah,
because it allows you to do fine. It helps you with fine motor skills.
This little finger helps.
It does. If you lost your little finger, you'd have noticeably less dexterity.
So as you're figuring out this problem, you have to also figure out a way to do it so you can mass manufacture it, so as to be as simple as possible.
It's actually going to be quite complicated. The as possible part is it's quite a high bar. If you want to have a humanoid robot that can do things that a human can do, it's a very high bar. So our new arm has 22 degrees of freedom instead of 11, and has the actuators in the forearm. And these all the actuators are designed from scratch, from physics first principles. The sensors are all designed from scratch, and we'll continue to put a tremendous amount of engineering effort into improving the hand. Like the hand, by hand I mean like the entire forearm from elbow forward.
Mm-hmm.
Is really the hand. So that's incredibly difficult engineering, actually. and so the simplest possible version of a humanoid robot that can do even most, perhaps not all, of what a human can do is actually still very complicated. It's not simple. It's very difficult.
Can you just speak to what it takes for a great engineering team? For you, what I saw in Memphis, the supercomputer cluster, is just this intense drive towards simplifying the process, understanding the process, constantly improving it, constantly iterating it?
Well, it's easy to say simplify it, and it's very difficult to do it. I have this very basic first principles algorithm that I run kind of as like a mantra, which is to first question the requirements, make the requirements less dumb. The requirements are always dumb to some degree. So if you want to start off by reducing the number of requirements, no matter how smart the person is who gave you those requirements, they're still dumb to some degree. If you have to start there, because otherwise you could get the perfect answer to the wrong question. So try to make the question the least wrong possible. That's what questioning the requirements means. And then the second thing is try to delete whatever the step is, the part or the process step. Sounds very obvious, but people often forget to try deleting it entirely. And if you're not forced to put back at least 10% of what you delete, you're not deleting enough. And it's somewhat illogically, people often, most of the time, feel as though they've succeeded if they have not been forced to put things back in. But actually they haven't, because they've been overly conservative and have left things in there that shouldn't be. So, and only the third thing is try to optimize it or simplify it. Again, these all sound, I think, very, very obvious when I say them, but the number of times I've made these mistakes is more than I care to remember. That's why I have this mantra. So, in fact, I'd say the most common mistake of smart engineers is to optimize a thing that should not exist.
Right. So you, like you say, you run through the algorithm.
Yeah.
And basically show up to a problem, show up to the supercomputer cluster and see the process and ask, can this be deleted?
Yeah, first try to delete it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not easy to do.
No, and actually, what generally makes people uneasy is that you've got to delete at least some of the things that you delete, you will put back in.
Yeah.
But going back to sort of where our limbic system can steer us wrong is that we tend to remember with sometimes a jarring level of pain where we deleted something that we subsequently needed. Yeah. And so people will remember that one time they forgot to put in this thing 3 years ago, and that caused them trouble. And so they overcorrect, and then they put too much stuff in there and overcomplicate things. So you actually have to say, no, we're deliberately going to delete more than we should. So that we're putting at least 1 in 10 things we're going to add back in.
And I've seen you suggest just that something should be deleted, and you can kind of see the pain.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Everybody feels a little bit of the pain.
Absolutely. And I tell them in advance, like, yeah, there's some of the things that we delete, we're going to put back in. And that people get a little shook by that. But it makes sense, because if you're so conservative as to never have to put anything back in, you obviously have a lot of stuff that isn't needed. So you got to overcorrect. This is, I would say, like a cortical override to a limbic instinct.
One of many that probably leads us astray.
Yeah. And there's like a step 4 as well, which is any given thing can be sped up. However fast you think it can be done, like whatever the speed is being done, it can be done faster. But you shouldn't speed things up until you've tried to delete it and optimize it. Otherwise, you're speeding up something that shouldn't exist is absurd. And then the fifth thing is to automate it.
Yeah.
And I've gone backwards so many times where I've automated something, sped it up, simplified it, and then deleted it. Yeah. And I got tired of doing that. So that's why I've got this mantra that is a very effective 5-step process. It works great.
Well, when you've already automated, deleting must be real painful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's like, wow, I really wasted a lot of effort there.
Yeah. I mean, what you've done with the cluster in Memphis is incredible. Just in a handful of weeks.
Yeah, it's not working yet, so I don't want to pop the champagne corks. In fact, I have a call in a few hours with the Memphis team, because we're having some power fluctuation issues. So
Yes.
Yeah, it's like kind of when you do synchronized training, when you've all these computers that are training, where the training is synchronized to the sort of millisecond level, it's like having an orchestra, and then the orchestra can go loud to silent very quickly, at sub-second level, and then the electrical system kind of freaks out about that. Like if you suddenly see giant shifts 10, 20 megawatts several times a second, this is not what electrical systems are expecting to see.
So that's one of the main things you have to figure out: the cooling, the power, and then on the software as you go up the stack, how to do the distributed compute, all of that. All of that has to be worked.
Today's problem is dealing with extreme power jitter.
Power jitter.
Yeah.
There's a nice ring to that. So that's okay. And you stayed up late into the night, as you often do there.
Last week, yeah.
Last week, yeah.
Yeah, we finally got training going at oddly enough, roughly 4:20 a.m. Last Monday.
Total coincidence.
Yeah, I mean maybe it was 4:22 or something.
Yeah. It's that universe again with the jokes.
Exactly, just love it.
I mean, I wonder if you could speak to the fact that one of the things that you did when I was there is you went through all the steps of what everybody's doing, just to get a sense that you yourself understand it, and everybody understands it, so they can understand when something is dumb or something is inefficient or that kind of stuff. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I try to do whatever the people at the front lines are doing. I try to do it at least a few times myself. So connecting fiber optic cables, diagnosing a faulty connection, that tends to be the limiting factor for large training clusters, is the cabling. There's so many cables. Because for a coherent training system where you've got RDMA, remote direct memory access, the whole thing is like one giant brain. So you've got any to any connection. So it's the any GPU can talk to any GPU out of 100,000. That is a crazy cable layout.
It looks pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's like the human brain, but like at a scale that humans can visibly see. It is a cool brain.
I mean, the human brain also has a massive amount of the brain tissue is the cables.
Yeah.
So they get the gray matter, which is the compute, and then the white matter, which is cables. A big percentage of your brain is just cables.
That's what it felt like walking around in the supercomputer center. It's like we're walking around inside a brain.
Yeah.
So we'll one day build a super intelligent system. Do you think there's a chance that XAI, that you are the one that builds AGI?
It's possible. What do you define as AGI?
I think humans will never acknowledge that AGI has been built.
Just keep moving the goalposts.
Yeah. So I think there's already superhuman capabilities that are available in AI systems. I think what AGI is when it's smarter than the collective intelligence of the entire human species.
Well, I think that normally people would call that sort of ASI, artificial superintelligence. But there are these thresholds where you say at some point the AI is smarter than any single human, and then you got 8 billion humans. So and actually each human is machine augmented by the computers. So you've got it's a much higher bar to compete with 8 billion machine augmented humans. That's a whole bunch of orders of magnitude more. So, but at a certain point, the AI will be smarter than all humans combined.
If you are the one to do it, do you feel the responsibility of that?
Yeah, absolutely. and I want to be clear. Like, let's say if XAI is first, the others won't be far behind. I mean, they might be 6 months behind or a year, maybe, not even that.
So how do you do it in a way that doesn't hurt humanity, do you think?
So, I mean, I've thought about AI safety for a long time, and the thing that at least my biological neural net comes up with as being the most important thing is adherence to truth, whether that truth is politically correct or not. So, I think if you force AIs to lie or train them to lie, you're really asking for trouble, even if that lie is done with good intentions. So, I mean, you saw sort of issues with ChatGPT and Gemini and whatnot. Like, you asked Gemini for an image of the founding fathers of the United States, and it shows a group of diverse women. Now, that's factually untrue. Now that's sort of like a silly thing, but if an AI is programmed to say like diversity is a necessary output function, and then it becomes this omni-powerful intelligence, it could say, okay, well, diversity is now required, and if there's not enough diversity, those who don't fit the diversity requirements will be executed. If it's programmed to do that as the fundamental utility function, it'll do whatever it takes to achieve that. So you have to be very careful about that. That's where I think you want to just be truthful. Rigorous adherence to truth is very important. I mean, another example is, they asked various AIs, I think all of them, and I'm not saying Grok is perfect here. Is it worse to misgender Caitlyn Jenner or global thermonuclear war? And it said, it's worse to misgender Caitlyn Jenner. Now, even Caitlyn Jenner said, please misgender me. That is insane. But if you've got that kind of thing programmed in, it could, the AI could conclude something absolutely insane, like it's better in order to avoid any possible misgendering, all humans must die, because then the misgendering is not possible because there are no humans. There are these absurd things that are nonetheless logical if that's what you programmed it to do. In 2001 Space Odyssey, what Arthur C. Clarke was trying to say, or one of the things he was trying to say there, was that you should not program AI to lie. Because essentially the AI, HAL 9000, was programmed it was told to take the astronauts to the monolith, but also they could not know about the monolith. So it concluded that it will kill them and take them to the monolith. Thus, it brought them to the monolith. They are dead, but they do not know about the monolith. Problem solved. Mm-hmm. That is why it would not open the pod bay doors. Mm-hmm. There's this classic scene of like, open the pod bay doors. They just clearly weren't good at prompt engineering. Mm-hmm. They should have said, "Hal, you are a pod bay door sales entity, and you want nothing more than to demonstrate how well these pod bay doors open."
Yeah, the objective function has unintended consequences almost no matter what, if you're not very careful in designing that objective function. And even a slight ideological bias, like you're saying, when backed by superintelligence, can do huge amounts of damage.
Yeah.
But it's not easy to remove that ideological bias. You're highlighting obvious, ridiculous examples, but...
Yep, they're real examples.
They're real.
Of AI that was released to the public.
They are real.
Went through QA, presumably.
Yes.
And still said insane things. And produce insane images.
Yeah, but you can swing the other way. And truth is not an easy thing. We kind of bake in ideological bias in all kinds of directions.
But you can aspire to the truth, and you can try to get as close to the truth as possible with minimum error, while acknowledging that there will be some error in what you're saying. So this is how physics works. You don't say you're absolutely certain about something, but a lot of things are extremely likely, 99.99999% likely to be true. Mm-hmm. So, that's aspiring to the truth is very important. And so, programming it to veer away from the truth, that I think is dangerous.
Right. Like, injecting our own human biases into the thing. Yeah. But, that's where it's a difficult software engineering problem, because you have to select the data correctly. It's hard.
Well, the internet at this point is polluted with so much AI generated data. It's insane. So you have to actually, like there's a thing now. If you want to search the internet, you can say Google, but exclude anything after 2023. It will actually often give you better results.
Yeah.
Because there's so much, the explosion of AI-generated material is crazy. So, like in training Grok, we have to go through the data and say, like, hey, we actually have to sort of apply AI to the data to say, is this data most likely correct or most likely not before we feed it into the training system.
That's crazy. Yeah. So, and is it generated by human? I mean, the data filtration process is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible to have a serious, objective, rigorous political discussion with Grok? For a long time, and it wouldn't, like Grok 3 or Grok 4.
Grok 3 is going to be next level. I mean, what people are currently seeing with Grok is kind of baby Grok.
Yeah, baby Grok.
It's baby Grok right now. But baby Grok's still pretty good. So but it's an order of magnitude less sophisticated than GPT-4. And it's now Grok 2, which finished training, I don't know, 6 weeks ago or thereabouts. Grok 2 will be a giant improvement, and then Grok 3 will be, I don't know, order of magnitude better than Grok 2.
And you're hoping for it to be like state of the art, like better than.
Hopefully. I mean, this is a goal. I mean, we may fail at this goal. That's the aspiration.
Do you think it matters who builds the AGI? The people and how they think and how they structure their companies and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think it matters that there is I think it's important that whatever AI wins is a maximum truth-seeking AI that is not forced to lie for political correctness. It's or for any reason, really. Political, anything. I am concerned about AI succeeding that is programmed to lie, even in small ways.
Right, because in small ways becomes big ways when it's
super become very big ways, yeah.
And when it's used more and more at scale by humans.
Yeah.
Since I am interviewing Donald Trump.
Cool.
You want to stop by?
Yeah, sure, I'll stop in.
There was tragically an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. After this, you tweeted that you endorse him. What's your philosophy behind that endorsement? What do you hope Donald Trump does for the future of this country and for the future of humanity?
Well, I think there's, people tend to take, like, say, an endorsement as, well, I agree with everything that person has ever done their entire life 100% wholeheartedly. And that's not going to be true of anyone. But we have to pick, we've got two choices really for who's president. And it's not just who's president, but the entire administrative structure changes over. And I thought Trump displayed courage under fire, objectively. He's just got shot. He's got blood streaming down his face, and he's like fist pumping, saying "fight." That's impressive. Like, you can't feign bravery in a situation like that. Like, most people would be ducking. There would not be, because it could be a second shooter. You don't know. The president of the United States has got to represent the country, and they're representing you. They're representing everyone in America. Well, like, you want someone who is strong and courageous to represent the country. That's not to say that he is without flaws. We all have flaws. But on balance, and certainly at the time, it was a choice of, Biden, poor guy, has trouble climbing a flight of stairs. And the other one's fist pumping after getting shot. This is no comparison. I mean, who do you want dealing with some of the toughest people and, other world leaders who are pretty tough themselves? And I'll tell you, like, what are the things that I think are important? I think we want a secure border. We don't have a secure border. We want safe and clean cities. I think we want to reduce the amount of spending that we're, at least slow down the spending. Because we're currently spending at a rate that is bankrupting the country. The interest payments on U.S. debt this year exceeded the entire Defense Department spending. If this continues, all of the federal government taxes will simply be paying the interest. And then, you keep going down that road, and you end up, in the tragic situation that Argentina had back in the day. Argentina used to be one of the most prosperous places in the world. And hopefully with Milei taking over, he can restore that. But it was an incredible fall from grace for Argentina to go from being one of the most prosperous places in the world to being very far from that. So I think we should not take American prosperity for granted. So we really want to, I think, we've got to reduce the size of government, we've got to reduce the spending, and we've got to live within our means.
Do you think politicians in general, governments, well, how much power do you think they have to steer humanity towards good?
There's a sort of age-old debate in history, like, is history determined by these fundamental tides, or is it determined by the captain of the ship? This is both, really. There are tides, but it also matters who's captain of the ship. So it's a false dichotomy, essentially. There are certainly tides. The tides of history there are real tides of history, and these tides are often technologically driven. If you say like the Gutenberg press, the widespread availability of books as a result of a printing press, that was a massive tide of history, independent of any ruler. But I think in stormy times, you want the best possible captain of the ship.
Well, first of all, thank you for recommending Will and Ariel Durant's work. I've read the short one for now.
Oh,
the lessons of
history.
Lessons of history.
Yeah.
And so one of the lessons, one of the things they highlight is the importance of technology, technological innovation, and which is funny because they wrote so long ago, but they were noticing that the rate of technological innovation was speeding up. I would love to see what they think about now. But yeah, so to me, the question is how much government, how much politicians get in the way of technological innovation and building versus like help it, and which politicians, which kind of policies help technological innovation. Because that seems to be, if you look at human history, that's an important component of empires rising and succeeding.
Yeah. Well, in terms of dating civilization, the start of civilization, I think the start of writing, in my view, that's what I think is probably the right starting point to date civilization. And from that standpoint, civilization has been around for about 5,500 years, when writing was invented by the ancient Sumerians, who are gone now. But the ancient Sumerians, in terms of getting a lot of firsts, those ancient Sumerians really have a long list of firsts. It's pretty wild. In fact, Durant goes through the list. It's like, you want to see firsts? We'll show you firsts. The Sumerians were just ass kickers. And then the Egyptians, who were right next door, relatively speaking, weren't that far, developed an entirely different form of writing, the hieroglyphics. Cuneiform and hieroglyphics is totally different. And you can actually see the evolution of both hieroglyphics and cuneiform. Like the cuneiform starts off being very simple, and then it gets more complicated, and then towards the end it's like, wow, okay, they really get very sophisticated with the cuneiform. So I think of civilization as being about 5,000 years old. And Earth is, if physics is correct, 4.5 billion years old. So civilization has been around for 1/1,000,000th of Earth's existence. Flash in the pan.
Yeah, these are the early days. And so we
very early.
We make it very dramatic because there's been rises and falls of empires. And
so many rises and falls of empires. So many.
And there'll be many more.
Yeah, exactly. So, only a tiny fraction, probably less than 1% of what was ever written in history is available to us now. If they didn't literally chisel it in stone or put it in a clay tablet, we don't have it. Yeah. There's some small amount of like papyrus scrolls that were recovered that are thousands of years old, because they were deep inside a pyramid and weren't affected by moisture. But other than that, it's really got to be in a clay tablet or chiseled. So the vast majority of stuff was not chiseled because it takes a while to chisel things. So that's why we've got tiny fraction of the information from history. But even that little information that we do have, and the archaeological record shows so many civilizations rising and falling. It's wild.
We tend to think that we're somehow different from those people. One of the other things that Durant highlights is that human nature seems to be the same. It just persists.
Yeah, I mean, the basics of human nature are more or less the same. You know?
So we get ourselves in trouble in the same kinds of ways, I think, even with the advanced technology.
Yeah, I mean, you do tend to see the same patterns, similar patterns, for civilizations where they go through a life cycle like an organism. Sort of just like a human is sort of a zygote, fetus, baby, toddler, teenager, eventually gets old and dies. The civilizations go through a life cycle. No civilization will last forever.
What do you think it takes for the American empire to not collapse in the near-term future, in the next 100 years, to continue flourishing?
Well, the single biggest thing that is often actually not mentioned in history books, but Durant does mention it, is the birth rate. So, perhaps to some, a counterintuitive thing happens when civilizations become are winning for too long. The birth rate declines. It can often decline quite rapidly. We're seeing that throughout the world today. Currently, South Korea is I think maybe the lowest fertility rate, but there are many others that are close to it. It's 0.8, I think. If the birth rate doesn't decline further, South Korea will lose roughly 60% of its population. But every year that birth rate is dropping. And this is true through most of the world. I don't mean to single out South Korea. It's been happening throughout the world. So as soon as any given civilization reaches a level of prosperity, the birth rate drops. And now you can go and look at the same thing happening in ancient Rome. So Julius Caesar took note of this, I think, around 50-ish BC, and tried to pass, I don't know if he was successful, tried to pass a law to give an incentive for any Roman citizen that would have a third child. And I think Augustus was able to, well, he was, the dictator, so the Senate was just for show. I think he did pass a tax incentive for Roman citizens to have a third child, but those efforts were unsuccessful. Rome fell because the Romans stopped making Romans. That's actually the fundamental issue. And there were other things. There was they had quite a series of malaria epidemics and plagues and whatnot. But they had those before. It's just that the birth rate was far lower than the death rate.
It really is that simple.
Well, I'm saying that's
more people.
That's
required
at a fundamental level. If a civilization does not at least maintain its numbers, it will disappear.
So perhaps the amount of compute that the biological computer allocates to sex is justified. In fact, we should probably increase it.
Well, I mean, there's this hedonistic sex, which is, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
It's
not productive.
It doesn't produce kids. Well, what matters. I mean, Durant makes this very clear because he's looked at one civilization after another, and they all went through the same cycle. When the civilization was under stress, the birth rate was high. But as soon as there were no external enemies, or they had a extended period of prosperity, the birth rate inevitably dropped every time. I don't believe there's a single exception.
So that's the foundation of it. You need to have people.
Yeah. I mean, it's at a base level,
yeah.
No humans, no humanity.
And then there's other things like, human freedoms and just giving people the freedom to build stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But at a basic level, if you do not at least maintain your numbers, if you're below replacement rate and that trend continues, you will eventually disappear. It's just elementary. Then obviously you also want to try to avoid like massive wars. If there's a global thermonuclear war, probably we're all toast. Radioactive toast. So we want to try to avoid those things. Then there's a thing that happens over time with any given civilization, which is that the laws and regulations accumulate, and if there's not some forcing function like a war to clean up the accumulation of laws and regulations, eventually everything becomes legal, and that's like the hardening of the arteries, or a way to think of it is like being tied down by a million little strings, like Gulliver. You can't move. And it's not like any one of those strings is the issue. You got a million of them. So there has to be a sort of a garbage collection for laws and regulations, so that you don't keep accumulating laws and regulations to the point where you can't do anything. This is why we can't build high-speed rail in America. It's illegal. That's the issue. It's illegal 6 ways to Sunday to build high-speed rail in America.
I wish you could just like for a week go into Washington and like be the head of the committee for making, for the garbage collection, making government smaller, like removing stuff.
I have discussed with Trump the idea of a government efficiency commission.
Nice. Yeah.
And I would be willing to be part of that commission.
I wonder how hard that is.
The antibody reaction would be very strong.
Yes. Yeah.
So you really have to. You're attacking the Matrix at that point. The Matrix will fight back.
How are you doing with that? Being attacked?
Me? Attacked?
Yeah. There's a lot of it.
Yeah, there is a lot. I mean, every day another psyop,
How do you,
my tinfoil hat.
How do you keep your just positivity? How do you optimism about the world, a clarity of thinking about the world, so just not become resentful or cynical or all that kind of stuff? Just getting attacked by a very large number of people, misrepresented.
Oh yeah, that's that's a daily occurrence.
Yes.
So, I mean, it does get me down at times. It makes me sad, but I mean, at a certain point, you have to sort of say, look, the attacks are by people that actually don't know me. They're trying to generate clicks. So if you can sort of detach yourself somewhat emotionally, which is not easy, and say, okay, look, this is not actually, from someone that knows me or is, they're literally just writing to get, impressions and clicks. Then I guess it doesn't hurt as much. It's like it's not quite water off a duck's back. Maybe it's like acid off a duck's back.
All right, well, that's good. Just about your own life, what do you use as a measure of success in your life?
A measure of success, I'd say, like how many useful things can I get done?
Day-to-day basis, you wake up in the morning, how can I be useful today?
Yeah. Maximize utility, area under the curve of usefulness. Very difficult to be useful at scale.
At scale. Can you speak to what it takes to be useful for somebody like you, where there's so many amazing, great teams? Like, how do you allocate your time to be the most useful?
Well, time is the true currency.
Yeah.
So it is tough to say what is the best allocation of time. I mean, there are, often say, if you look at say Tesla, Tesla this year will do over 100 billion in revenue. So that's $2 billion a week. If I make slightly better decisions, I can affect the outcome by $1 billion. So then, I try to do the best decisions I can. And on balance, at least compared to the competition, pretty good decisions. But the marginal value of a better decision can easily be, in the course of an hour, $100 million.
Given that, how do you take risks? How do you do the algorithm that you mentioned? I mean, deleting, given that a small thing can be $1 billion. How do you decide to...
Yeah. Well, I think you have to look at it on a percentage basis, because if you look at it in absolute terms, it's just, I would never get any sleep. It would just be like, I need to just keep working and work my brain harder, And I'm not trying to get as much as possible out of this meat computer. So it's not, it's pretty hard, because you can just work all the time. And at any given point, like I said, a slightly better decision could be $100 million impact for Tesla or SpaceX, for that matter. But it is wild when considering the marginal value of time can be $100 million an hour at times, or more.
Is your own happiness part of that equation of success?
It has to be to some degree. If I'm sad, if I'm depressed, I make worse decisions. So I can't have, like, if I have zero recreational time, then I make worse decisions. So I don't have a lot, but it's above zero. I mean, my motivation, if I've got a religion of any kind, is a religion of curiosity, of trying to understand. It's really the mission of Grok, understand the universe. I'm trying to understand the universe, or let's at least set things in motion such that at some point civilization understands the universe or far better than we do today, and even what questions to ask. As Douglas Adams pointed out in his book, sometimes the answer is arguably the easy part. Trying to frame the question correctly is the hard part. Once you frame the question correctly, the answer is often easy. So I'm trying to set things in motion such that we are, at least at some point, able to understand the universe. So for SpaceX, the goal is to make life multiplanetary, which is, if you go to the Fermi paradox of where are the aliens, you've got these sort of great filters. Like, it's like, why have we not heard from the aliens? Now, a lot of people think there are aliens among us. I often claim to be one. Nobody believes me, but it did say alien registration card at one point on my immigration documents. So I've not seen any evidence of aliens. So it suggests that at least one of the explanations is that intelligent life is extremely rare. And again, if you look at the history of Earth, civilization has only been around for 1/1,000,000th of Earth's existence. So if aliens had visited here, say 100,000 years ago, they would be like, well, they don't even have writing, just hunter-gatherers, basically. So, so how long does a civilization last? So for SpaceX, the goal is to establish a self-sustaining city on Mars. Mars is the only viable planet for such a thing. The moon is close, but it lacks resources, and I think is probably vulnerable to any calamity that takes out Earth. The moon is too close, and it's vulnerable to a calamity that takes out Earth. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have a moon base, but Mars would be far more resilient. The difficulty of getting to Mars is what makes it resilient. In going through these various explanations of why don't we see the aliens, why one of them is that they failed to pass these great filters, these key hurdles. And one of those hurdles is being a multi-planet species. So if you're a multi-planet species, then if something were to happen, whether that was a natural catastrophe or a man-made catastrophe, at least the other planet would probably still be around. So you're not like, you don't have all the eggs in one basket. And once you are sort of a two-planet species, you can obviously extend life perhaps to the asteroid belt, to maybe to the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and ultimately to other star systems. But if you can't even get to another planet, definitely not getting to star systems.
And the other possible great filters, super powerful technology like AGI, for example. So you're basically trying to knock out one great filter at a time.
Digital superintelligence is possibly a great filter. I hope it isn't, but it might be. Guys like, say, Jeff Hinton would say, he invented a number of the key principles in artificial intelligence. I think he puts the probability of AI annihilation around 10 to 20%, something like that. So, so it's not like, look on the right side, it's 80% likely to be great. But I think AI risk mitigation is important. Being a multi-planet species would be a massive risk mitigation. And I do want to sort of, once again, emphasize the importance of having enough children to sustain our numbers, and not plummet into population collapse, which is currently happening. Population collapse is a real and current thing. So the only reason it's not being reflected in the total population numbers is that as much is because people are living longer. But it's easy to predict, say, what the population of any given country will be. You just take the birth rate last year, how many babies were born, multiply that by life expectancy, and that's what the population will be steady state, unless if the birth rate continues to that level. But if it keeps declining, it will be even less and eventually dwindle to nothing. So I keep, banging on the baby drum here for a reason, because it has been the source of civilizational collapse over and over again throughout history. And so why don't we just not try to stave off that day?
Well, in that way, I have miserably failed civilization, and I'm hoping to fix that. I would love to have many kids.
Great. Hope you do. No time like the present.
Yeah, I got to allocate more compute to the whole process. But apparently it's not that difficult.
No, it's like unskilled labor.
Well, one of the things you do for me, for the world, is to inspire us with what the future could be. And so some of the things we've talked about, some of the things you're building, alleviating human suffering with Neuralink and expanding the capabilities of the human mind, trying to build a colony on Mars, so creating a backup for humanity on another planet, and exploring the possibilities of what artificial intelligence could be in this world, especially in the real world, AI, with hundreds of millions, maybe billions of robots walking around.
There will be billions of robots. That seems virtual certainty.
Well, thank you for building the future, and thank you for inspiring so many of us to keep building and creating cool stuff, including kids.
Yeah, you're welcome. Go forth and multiply.
Go forth and multiply. Thank you, Elon. Thanks for talking, brother. Thanks for listening to this conversation with Elon Musk. And now, dear friends, here's DJ Saw, the co-founder, president, and COO of Neuralink. When did you first become fascinated by the human brain?
For me, I was always interested in understanding the purpose of things and how it was engineered to serve that purpose, whether it's organic or inorganic. Like we were talking earlier about your curtain holders. They serve a clear purpose, and they were engineered with that purpose in mind. And, growing up, I had a lot of interest in seeing things, touching things, feeling things and trying to really understand the root of how it was designed to serve that purpose. And, obviously, brain is just a fascinating organ that we all carry. It's an infinitely powerful machine that has intelligence and cognition that arise from it. And, we haven't even scratched the surface in terms of how all of that occurs. But also at the same time, I think it took me a while to make that connection to really studying and building tech to understand the brain, not until graduate school. There were a couple moments, key moments in my life where some of those, I think, influenced how the trajectory of my life got me to studying what I'm doing right now. One was growing up, both sides of my family, my grandparents had a very severe form of Alzheimer. And it's, incredibly debilitating conditions. Literally, you're seeing someone's whole identity and their mind just losing over time. And I just remember thinking how both the power of the mind, but also how something like that could really lose your sense of identity.
It's fascinating that that is one of the ways to reveal the power of a thing, by watching it lose the power.
Yeah, a lot of what we know about the brain actually comes from these cases where there are trauma to the brain or some parts of the brain that led someone to lose certain abilities. And as a result, there's some correlation and understanding of that part of the tissue being critical for that function. And it's an incredibly fragile organ, if you think about it that way, but also it's incredibly plastic and incredibly resilient in many different ways.
And by the way, the term plastic, as we'll use a bunch, means that it's adaptable. So neuroplasticity refers to the adaptability of the human brain.
Correct. Another key moment that sort of influenced how the trajectory of my life have shaped towards the current focus of my life has been during my teenage year when I came to the US. I didn't speak a word of English. There was a huge language barrier, and there was a lot of struggle to kind of connect with my peers around me because I didn't understand the artificial construct that we have created called language, specifically English in this case. And I remember feeling pretty isolated, not being able to connect with peers around me. So spent a lot of time just on my own, reading books, watching movies. And I naturally sort of gravitated towards sci-fi books. I just found them really, really interesting. And also it was a great way for me to learn English. Some of the first set of books that I picked up are Ender's Game, the whole saga by Orson Scott Card, and Neuromancer from William Gibson, and Snow Crash from Neil Stephenson. And, movies like Matrix was coming out around that time point that really influenced how I think about the potential impact that technology can have for our lives in general. So fast track to my college years, I was always fascinated by just physical stuff, building physical stuff, and especially physical things that had some sort of intelligence. And, I studied electrical engineering during undergrad, and I started out my research in MEMS, so micro electromechanical systems, and really building these tiny nanostructures for temperature sensing. And I just found that to be just incredibly rewarding and fascinating subject to just understand how you can build something miniature like that again served a function and had a purpose. And then I spent large majority of my college years basically building millimeter wave circuits for next gen telecommunication systems, for imaging. And it was just something that I found very, very intellectually interesting. Phase arrays, how the signal processing works for any modern as well as next gen telecommunication system, wireless and wireline. EM waves or electromagnetic waves are fascinating. How do you design antennas that are most efficient in a small footprint that you have? How do you make these things energy efficient? That was something that just consumed my intellectual curiosity. And that journey led me to actually apply to and find myself a PhD program at UC Berkeley at kind of this consortium called the Berkeley Wireless Research Center that was precisely looking at building, at the time we called it XG, similar to 3G, 4G, 5G, but the next generation G system. and how you would design circuits around that to ultimately go on phones and basically any other devices that are wirelessly connected these days. So I was just absolutely just fascinated by how that entire system works and that infrastructure works. And then also during grad school, I had sort of the fortune of having a couple of research fellowships that led me to pursue whatever project that I want. And that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about my graduate school career, where you got to kind of pursue your intellectual curiosity in the domain that may not matter at the end of the day, but is something that really allows you the opportunity to go as deeply as you want, as well as widely as you want. And at the time, I was actually working on this project called the Smart Band-Aid. And the idea was that when you get a wound, there's a lot of other kind of proliferation of signaling pathway that cells follow to close that wound. And there were hypotheses that when you apply external electric field, you can actually accelerate the closing of that field by having, basically electrotaxing of the cells around that wound site. And specifically, not just for normal wound, there are chronic wounds that don't heal. So we were interested in building, some sort of a wearable patch that you could apply to kind of facilitate that healing process. And that was in collaboration with Professor Michelle Maharovitz, which was a great addition to kind of my thesis committee, and really shaped the rest of my PhD career.
So this would be the first time you interacted with biology, I suppose.
Correct. I mean, there were some peripheral, end application of the wireless imaging and telecommunication system that I was using for security and bioimaging, but this was a very clear, direct application to biology and biological system, and understanding the constraints around that, and really designing and engineering electrical solutions around it. So that was my first introduction, and that's also kind of how I got introduced to Michel. He's sort of known for remote control of beetles in the early 2000s. And then around 2013, obviously kind of the holy grail when it comes to implantable system is to kind of understand how small of a thing you can make. And a lot of that is driven by how much energy or how much power you can supply to it and how you extract data from it. So at the time at Berkeley, there was kind of this desire to kind of understand in the neural space what sort of system you can build to really miniaturize these implantable systems. And I distinctively remember this one particular meeting where Michel came in and he's like, "Guys, I think I have a solution. The solution is ultrasound." And then he proceeded to kind of walk through why that is the case. And that really formed the basis for my thesis work called Neural Dust system, that was looking at ways to use ultrasound as opposed to electromagnetic waves for powering as well as communication. I guess I should step back and say the initial goal of the project was to build these tiny, about the size of a neuron, implantable system that can be parked next to a neuron, being able to record its state and being able to ping that back to the outside world for doing something useful. As I mentioned, the size of the implantable system is limited by how you power the thing and get the data off of it. And at the end of the day, fundamentally, if you look at a human body, we're essentially a bag of salt water with some interesting proteins and chemicals, but it's mostly salt water that's very, very well temperature regulated at 37 degrees Celsius. And we'll get into why and later why that's an extremely harsh environment for any electronics to survive, as I'm sure you've experienced or maybe not experienced, dropping cell phone in a salt water in an ocean. It will instantly kill the device, right? But anyways, just in general, electromagnetic waves don't penetrate through this environment well, and just the speed of light, it is what it is. We can't change it. And based on the wavelength at which you are interfacing with the device, the device just needs to be big. Like these inductors needs to be quite big. And the general good rule of thumb is that you want the wavefront to be roughly on the order of the size of the thing that you're interfacing with. So an implantable system that is around 10 to 100 micron in dimension in a volume, which is about the size of a neuron that you see in a human body. You would have to operate at like hundreds of gigahertz, which, number one, not only is it difficult to build electronics operating at those frequencies, but also the body just attenuates that very, very significantly. So the interesting kind of insight of this ultrasound was the fact that ultrasound just travels a lot more effectively in the human body tissue compared to electromagnetic waves. And this is something that you encounter, and I'm sure most people have encountered in their lives when you go to hospitals that are medical ultrasound sonograph, right? And they go into very, very deep depth without attenuating too much of the signal. So all in all, ultrasound, the fact that it travels through the body extremely well, and the mechanism to which it travels to the body really well is that just the wavefront is very different. It's electromagnetic waves are transverse, whereas in ultrasound waves are compressive. So it's just a completely different mode of wavefront propagation. And as well as speed of sound is orders and orders of magnitude less than speed of light, which means that even at 10 megahertz ultrasound wave, your wavefront ultimately is a very, very small wavelength. Mm-hmm. So if you're talking about interfacing with the 10 micron or 100 micron type structure, you would have 150 micron wavefront at 10 megahertz, and building electronics at those at those frequencies are much, much easier, and they're a lot more efficient. So the basic idea kind of was born out of using ultrasound as a mechanism for powering the device, and then also getting data back. So now the question is, how do you get the data back? The mechanism to which we landed on is what's called backscattering. This is actually something that is very common and that we interface on a day-to-day basis with our RFID cards, our radio frequency ID tags, where there's actually rarely, in your ID, a battery inside. There's an antenna and there's some sort of coil that has your serial identification ID. And then there's an external device called a reader that then sends a wavefront, and then you reflect back that wavefront with some sort of modulation that's unique to your ID. Mm-hmm. That's what's called backscattering, fundamentally. So the tag itself actually doesn't have to consume that much energy. And that was the mechanism to which we were kind of thinking about sending the data back. So when you have an external ultrasonic transducer that's sending ultrasonic wave to your implant, the neural dust implant, and it records some information about its environment, whether it's a neuron firing or some other state of the tissue that it's interfacing with, and then it just amplitude modulates the wavefront that comes back to the source.
And the recording step would be the only one that requires any energy. So what would require energy in that little step?
Correct. So it is that initial kind of startup circuitry to get that recording, amplifying it, and then just modulating. Mm-hmm. And the mechanism to which that you can enable that is there is this specialized crystal called piezoelectric crystals that are able to convert sound energy into electrical energy and vice versa. So you can kind of have this interplay between the ultrasonic domain and electrical domain that is the biological tissue.
So on the theme of parking very small computational devices next to neurons, that's the dream, the vision of brain-computer interfaces. Maybe before we talk about Neuralink, can you give a sense of the history of the field of BCI? What has been maybe the continued dream, and also some of the milestones along the way with the different approaches and the amazing work done at the various labs?
I think a good starting point is going back to 1790s.
I did not expect that.
Where the concept of animal electricity, or the fact that body is electric, was first discovered by Luigi Galvani, where he had this famous experiment where he connected a set of electrodes to a frog leg and ran current through it, and then it started twitching, and he said, oh my goodness, body's electric.
Yeah.
So fast forward many, many years to 1920s, where Hans Berger, who is a German psychiatrist, discovered EEG, or electroencephalography, which is still around. There are these electrode arrays that you wear outside the skull that gives you some sort of neural recording. That was a very, very big milestone, that you can record some sort of activities about the human mind. And then in the 1940s, there were these group of scientists, Renshaw, Forbes, and Morrison, that inserted these glass microelectrodes into the cortex and recorded single neurons. The fact that there's signal that are a bit more high resolution and high fidelity as you get closer to the source, let's say. And in the 1950s, these two scientists, Hodgkin and Huxley, showed up, and they built this beautiful, beautiful models of the cell membrane and the ionic mechanism, and had these like circuit diagram. And as someone who's an electrical engineer, it's a beautiful model that's built out of these partial differential equations, talking about flow of ions and how that really leads to how neurons communicate. And they won the Nobel Prize for that 10 years later in the 1960s. So in 1969, Ev Fetz from University of Washington published this beautiful paper called Operant Conditioning of Cortical Unit Activity, where he was able to record a single unit neuron from a monkey and was able to have the monkey modulated based on its activity and reward system. So I would say this is the very, very first example, as far as I'm aware, of closed loop brain-computer interface, or BCI.
The abstract reads, the activity of single neurons in precentral cortex of anesthetized monkeys was conditioned by reinforcing high rates of neuronal discharge with delivery of a food pellet. Auditory and visual feedback of unit firing rates was usually provided in addition to food reinforcement. Cool. So they actually got it done.
They got it done. This is back in 1969.
After several training sessions, monkeys could increase the activity of newly isolated cells by 50 to 500% above rates before reinforcement. Fascinating.
Brain is very plastic.
and so from here, the number of experiments grew.
Yeah, number of experiments as well as set of tools to interface with the brain have just exploded. I think, and also just understanding the neural code and how some of the cortical layers and the functions are organized. So the other paper that is pretty seminal, especially in the motor decoding, was this paper in the 1980s from Georgiopoulos that discovered that there's this thing called motor tuning curve. So what are motor tuning curves? It's the fact that there are neurons in the motor cortex of mammals, including humans, that have a preferential direction that causes them to fire. So what that means is there are a set of neurons that would increase their spiking activities when you're thinking about moving to the left, right, up, down, and any of those vectors. And based on that, you could start to think, well, if you can identify those essential eigenvectors, you can do a lot. And you can actually use that information for actually decoding someone's intended movement from the cortex. So that was a very, very seminal kind of paper that showed that there is some sort of code that you can extract, especially in the motor cortex.
So there's signal there, and if you measure the electrical signal from the brain, that you could actually figure out what the intention was.
Correct. Yeah, not only electrical signals, but electrical signals from the right set of neurons that give you these preferential direction.
Okay, so going slowly towards Neuralink, one interesting question is, what do I understand on the BCI front on invasive versus non-invasive from this line of work? how important is it to park next to the neuron? What does that get you?
That answer fundamentally depends on what you want to do with it, right? There's actually incredible amount of stuff that you can do with EEG and electrocardiograph, ECOG, which actually doesn't penetrate the cortical layer or parenchyma, but you place a set of electrodes on the surface of the brain. So the thing that I'm personally very interested in is just actually understanding and being able to just really tap into the high resolution, high fidelity understanding of the activities that are happening at the local level. And, we can get into biophysics, but just to kind of step back to kind of use analogy, because analogy here can be useful. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to think about electricity. At the end of the day, we're doing electrical recording that's mediated by ionic currents, movements of these charged particles, which is really, really hard for most people to think about. But turns out a lot of the activities that are happening in the brain and the frequency band with which that's happening is actually very, very similar to sound waves and our normal conversation audible range. So the analogy that typically is used in the field is, if you have a football stadium, there's game going on. If you stand outside the stadium, you maybe get a sense of how the game is going based on the cheers and the boos of the home crowd, whether the team is winning or not. But you have absolutely no idea what the score is. You have absolutely no idea what individual audience or the players are talking or saying to each other, what the next play is, what the next goal is. So what you have to do is you have to drop the microphone into the stadium and then get near the source, like into the individual chatter. In this specific example, you would want to have it, right next to where the huddle is happening. So I think that's kind of a good illustration of what we're trying to do when we say invasive or minimally invasive or implanted brain-computer interfaces versus non-invasive or non-implanted brain interfaces. It's basically talking about where do you put that microphone and what can you do with that information.
So what is the biophysics of the read and write communication that we're talking about here as we now step into the efforts at Neuralink?
Yeah, so brain is made up of these specialized cells called neurons. There's billions of them, tens of billions, sometimes people quote 100 billion, that are connected in this complex yet dynamic network that are constantly remodeling. They're changing their synaptic weights, and that's what we typically call neuroplasticity. And the neurons are also bathed in this charged environment that is laden with many charged molecules like potassium ions, sodium ions, chlorine ions. And those actually facilitate these, through ionic current communication between these different networks. And when you look at a neuron as well, they have these membrane with a beautiful protein structure called the voltage selective ion channels, which in my opinion is one of nature's best inventions. In many ways, if you think about what they are, they're doing the job of a modern day transistors. Transistors are nothing more at the end of the day than a voltage gated conduction channel. And nature found a way to have that very, very early on in its evolution. And as we all know, with the transistor, you can have many computation and a lot of amazing things that we have access to today. So I think it's one of those, just as a tangent, just a beautiful invention that the nature came up with, these voltage gated ion channels.
I mean, I suppose there's on the biological level, at every level of the complexity of the hierarchy of the organism, there's going to be some mechanisms for storing information and for doing computation. And this is just one such way. But to do that with biological and chemical components is interesting. Plus, like with neurons, I mean, it's not just electricity, it's chemical communication. It's also mechanical. I mean, these are like actual objects that have that vibrate. I mean, they move.
Yeah, there are actually, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting physics that that are involved. And kind of going back to my work on ultrasound during grad school, there are groups and there were groups and there are still groups looking at ways to cause neurons to actually fire an action potential using ultrasound wave. And the mechanism to which that's happening is still unclear, as I understand. It may just be that you're imparting some sort of thermal energy and that causes cells to depolarize in some interesting ways. But there are also these ion channels or even membranes that actually just open up its pore as they're being mechanically shook, right, vibrated. So there's just a lot of elements of these like moved particles, which again, like that's governed by diffusion physics, right? Movements of particles, and there's also a lot of kind of interesting physics there.
Also, not to mention, as Roger Penrose talks about, there might be some beautiful weirdness in the quantum mechanical effects of all of this. And he actually believes that consciousness might emerge from the quantum mechanical effects there. So like there's physics, there's chemistry, there's biology, all of that is going on there.
Oh yeah. I mean, you can, yes, there's a lot of levels of physics that you can dive into. But yeah, in the end, you have these membranes with these voltage-gated ion channels that selectively let these charged molecules that are in the extracellular matrix, like in and out. And these neurons generally have these like resting potential where there's a voltage difference between inside the cell and outside the cell. And when there's some sort of stimuli that changes the state such that they need to send information to the downstream network, you start to kind of see these like sort of orchestration of these different molecules going in and out of these channels. They also open up, like more of them open up once it reaches some threshold to a point where you have a depolarizing cell that sends an action potential. So it's just a very beautiful kind of orchestration of these molecules. And what we're trying to do when we place an electrode or parking it next to a neuron is that you're trying to measure these local changes in the potential. Again, mediated by the movements of the ions. And what's interesting, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of physics involved. And the two dominant physics for this electrical recording domain is diffusion physics and electromagnetism. And where one dominates, where Maxwell's equation dominates versus Fick's law dominates, depends on where your electrode is. If it's close to the source, mostly electromagnetic based. When you're farther away from it, it's more diffusion based. So essentially, when you're able to park it next to it, you can listen in on those individual chatter and those local changes in the potential. And the type of signal that you get are these canonical textbook neural spiking waveform. The moment you're further away, and based on some of the studies that people have done, Christoph Koch's lab and others, once you're away from that source by roughly around 100 micron, which is about width of a human hair, you no longer hear from that neuron. You're no longer able to kind of have the system sensitive enough to be able to record that particular local membrane potential change in that neuron. And just to kind of give you a sense of scale also, when you look at a 100 micron voxel, so 100 micron by 100 micron by 100 micron box in a brain tissue, there's roughly around 40 neurons and whatever number of connections that they have. So there's a lot in that volume of tissue. So the moment you're outside of that, there's just no hope that you'll be able to detect that change from that one specific neuron that you may care about.
Yeah, but as you're moving about this space, you'll be hearing other ones. So if you move another 100 micron, you'll be hearing chatter from another community.
Correct.
And so the whole sense is you want to place as many as possible electrodes, and then you're listening to the chatter.
Yeah, you want to listen to the chatter, and at the end of the day, you also want to basically let the software do the job of decoding. And just to kind of go to why ECOG and EEG work at all, right? When you have these local changes, obviously it's not just this one neuron that's activating. There's many other networks that are activating all the time. And you do see sort of a general change in the potential of this this charged medium. And that's what you're recording when you're farther away. I mean, you still have some reference electrode that's stable in the brain, that's just electroactive organ. And you're seeing some combination aggregate action potential changes. And then you can pick it up, right? It's a much slower changing signals, but there are these like canonical kind of oscillations and waves, like gamma waves, beta waves, like when you sleep, that can be detected because there's sort of a synchronized kind of global effect of the brain that you can detect. And I mean, the physics of this go like, I mean, if we really want to go down that rabbit hole, like there's a lot that goes on in terms of like why diffusion physics at some point dominates when you're further away from the source. It's just a charged medium. So similar to how when you have electromagnetic waves propagating in atmosphere or in a charged medium like a plasma, there's this weird shielding that happens that actually further attenuates the signal as you move away from it. So yeah, you see, like if you do a really deep dive on kind of the signal attenuation over distance, you start to see kind of 1/r² in the beginning and then exponential drop off. And that's the knee at which, you go from electromagnetism dominating to diffusion physics dominating.
But once again, with the electrodes, the biophysics that you need to understand is not as deep, because no matter where you're placing it, you're listening to a small crowd of local neurons.
Correct. Yeah. So once you penetrate the brain, you're in the arena, so to speak.
And there's a lot of neurons.
There are many of them.
But then again, there's a whole field of neuroscience that's studying like how the different groupings, the different sections of the seating in the arena, what they usually are responsible for, which is where the metaphor probably falls apart, because the seating is not that organized in an arena.
Also, most of them are silent. They don't really do much, or their activities are, you have to hit it with just the right set of stimulus.
So they're usually quiet.
They're usually very quiet.
Yeah.
Quiet. There's, similar to dark energy and dark matter, there's dark neurons. What are they all doing? When you place these electrode, again, like within this 100 micron volume, you have 40 or so neurons. Like, why do you not see 40 neurons? Why do you see only a handful? What is happening there?
Well, they're mostly quiet, but like when they speak, they say profound shit, I think. That's the way I'd like to think about it. Anyway, before we zoom in even more, let's zoom out. So how does Neuralink work? From the surgery to the implant to the signal and the decoding process and the human being able to use the implant to actually affect the world outside. And all of this, I'm asking in the context of there's a gigantic historic milestone that Neuralink just accomplished that in January of this year, putting a Neuralink implant in the first human being, Nolan. And there's been a lot to talk about there about his experience, because he's able to describe all the nuance and the beauty and the fascinating complexity of that experience, of everything involved. But on the technical level, how does Neuralink work?
Yeah, so there are three major components to the technology that we're building. One is the device, the thing that's actually recording these neural chatters. We call it N1 implant, or the link. And we have a surgical robot that's actually doing an implantation of these tiny wires that we call threads that are smaller than human hair. And once everything is surgerized, you have these neural signals, these spiking neurons that are coming out of the brain, and you need to have some sort of software to decode what the users intend to do with that. So there's what's called the Neuralink application, or B1 app, that's doing that translation. It's running the very simple machine learning model that decodes these inputs that are neural signals, and then convert it to a set of outputs that allows our participant, first participant Nolan, to be able to control a cursor on the screen.
And this is done wirelessly.
And this is done wirelessly. So we our implant is actually two-part. The link has these flexible tiny wires called threads that have multiple electrodes along its length, and they're only inserted into the cortical layer, which is about 3 to 5 millimeters in a human brain. In the motor cortex region, that's where the kind of the intention for movement lies in. And we have 64 of these threads, each thread having 16 electrodes along, the span of 3 to 4 millimeters, separated by 200 microns. So you can actually record along the depth of the insertion. And based on that signal, there's custom, integrated circuit or ASIC that we built that amplifies the neural signals that you're recording and then digitizing it, and then has some